Martin,
Yes, hello.
I'm not a peptide retard. I don't want to
Then
debate you, but
why'd you ask to come here?
because I played poker with you one time and it was cool.
I'm trying to talk to a peptide retard. Don't do that again. Hello. Nima.
Oh, hello. I don't have anything to say in terms of like being pro peptides. I just
Why
wanted to
the
say
fuck are
that.
you here? What are you, stupid?
No.
Yes, you are actually. Hello? Hello?
Hey Shkreli, how are
What's
you?
up?
Good. Recently saw your post about peptides. I was wondering how different is this from, let's say, vitamins that have low bioavailability anyways, and these supplement companies are selling, you know, exorbitant amounts of vitamins over the counter to people. Wouldn't peptides sort of fall under that same category where they're not really going to be as effective as they're advertising, but people are still going to buy them and use them?
So are you pro peptide?
No, I mean like these vitamin companies, they're still making
Okay,
money.
wait. You got to answer my question. Are you pro peptide?
Um, I th- I haven't seen any research for.
Jesus Christ.
I guess yeah, I am pro peptide.
Okay, great. And so what makes you pro peptide?
I think they're not doing anything new, but I think the use case is easier to access. They're breaking a point of entry
Okay. So,
for already existing medicines. They're breaking a point of entry.
right. So are you in the U.S.?
Yeah,
We have a system in the U.S. with the FDA where you either have an FDA approval or you don't. Right. That's how medicine works in this country.
yeah.
Right. So you want a new way for medicine to work.
No, just I think an alternative way.
Okay, but that's not really what's on the table, is it? I mean,
I mean,
it's
how different is that from, let's say, you going to your doctor to get your steroid injections versus taking them at home?
okay. Well, you're conflating a lot of things. So, in the United States of America, you need a prescription for a prescription drug. And to get a prescription, you need a physician who writes down on a piece of paper your name and the name of the drug, which has been FDA approved. So when you say a steroid, like dexamethasone, for example, that's a prescription drug because some company decided to spend a lot of money and get it FDA approved. So you can take it when you're sick, not when you fucking feel like it or some other steroid where you don't know if it works or not. Right? Why do you want to break what's working? What's like there to stop you from hurting yourself?
Yeah, no, that's valid. I'm saying I just see like there's the potential for it to also be in the market.
What potential? Why? How do you think it
Well,
helps?
I drew a comparison to vitamins.
Yeah, I don't understand your comparison. These aren't vitamins.
Well, I view the same way as like people don't necessarily need these vitamins if the bioavailability is very low. They might not see any results from it actually. The same thing goes for peptides, no?
Well, do you know what the grass list is?
No.
Okay, so you don't really know a lot about medicine.
No.
Right, but you want to talk about medicine. You think maybe
No,
like it makes sense to like
I'm no medicine expert. No.
spend a little time on studying medicine before you start diving in and you know throwing out new laws and new ways of doing things? Some of us have spent our whole lives on this stuff.
I see.
You know, vitamins are on the grass list. It's generally regarded as safe.
But there's no, like there's very low bioavailability of taking these over
There's
the counter
nothing to do
vitamins.
with. There's nothing to do with anything.
So you're saying peptides are more harmful than over the counter vitamins?
What I'm saying is that we have a method by which we decide what is regulated as a drug and what isn't. Everything is a drug, an unapproved drug, unless it goes to the 505 pathway to get FDA approval, or it's on the GRAS list. Peptides, quote unquote, or what you think are peptides, are not on that list. So they have to go get FDA approval like everybody else. You want a special carve out for some undescriptive like slosh of drugs that you personally have some weird vibe about that you think should be on the GRAS list. Like maybe you're trying to say if a drug has no bioavailability, why not throw it on the GRAS list? Well, the GRAS list is meant to be inclusion-based, not exclusion-based. So it's supposed to be drugs that are like affirmatively known to be safe, like a vitamin. You know, for the FDA to let any drug that has no bioavailability on this list, well, bioavailability is a function of formulation, among other things. So formulation of a drug can change bioavailability. One manufacturer could get 10%, another can get 2%. So it's just like a complete non sequitur and misunderstanding of pharmacology. Nor should the FDA or anybody else for that matter think about or worry about how much bioavailability there is, because you can scale dose with bioavailability. It's called free fraction. This is what pharmacology is all about. If the free fraction is, you titrate dose to what the free fraction required physiologically is. So if your bioavailability is low, well, it's fine. Like for example, you take Claritin, it's a 5 milligram pill. It's really it's tiny. It's like a speck of dust. Bioavailability is really high. Free fraction is really high. All those things result in this like little 5 milligram pill. You take an antibiotic, 600 milligram azithromycin, it's because the calculations work out to that's how much you got to take. So bioavailability is just a percentage that you have to use to get to your estimated dose. But again, this let's see if we get somebody else who wants to talk about
thanks.
Propeptides. Yeah. Hello. Mr. Anish. Dr. Coca. You're on the air. All right, we'll wait and see if you show up. Mr. 6 to 9. Where are my pro-peptide retards?
Can you hear me?
Yes, hello.
Yeah, no, so I understand that you're saying that like these form of peptides aren't FDA approved, but there are a number of peptides, insulin, a lot of the GLP-1s and all that.
Just real quick, while you cogitate on that, I see you mind of intro. You wanted to come chat. I want to talk to you in 1 second. Let me just finish this guy off. What are you saying, my brother?
I'm saying that like there are already FDA approved peptides, such as insulin and the GLP-1s.
Peptides have been around for 100 years, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean,
do you think they're different from antibodies or small molecules?
No, but like in the case of like a type 1 diabetic, they require insulin, to treat their diabetes. But each peptide has a different use case. So
most of them have no use case. Just because it's a peptide doesn't mean it does something. Peptide is just a string of letters, right?
Yes.
20 amino acids. You have 20 to the nth power combinations based on the number of amino acids, right? Do you think they're all biologically relevant?
I mean, I would think that if you already have approved peptides such as insulin, GLP-1s that have went through the FDA trials, just a different chain length of a peptide isn't going to have a major impact on the
But what does this have to do
body.
with?
Yeah, that's fair.
I could take your name. I could take your name and come up with a peptide just based on your name, right? Like no, I'm serious. Like so, Mr. 6 to 9, right? So S. Do you know any of this stuff? Like S is serine.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, S
No.
is serine, I is isoleucine. So like I
Yeah.
literally, I might have to like borrow instead of X, like do a different one, but I could basically just make you a custom peptide that is your full name. And does that work for something? Are you going to say, "Oh, I'm going to try it and see if I feel better"?
Yeah.
That's not medicine. Medicine is an intelligent,
Yeah.
approach to doing this stuff. All right, let's get this
Okay.
mind of Instra guy on.
Did you remove him?
What?
Did you remove the other guy talking for me, or is he still here?
Yeah, I just do guys one at a time. What's up?
Okay, so I'm not going to be like rude or anything.
You already have been.
Well, I mean, I'm saying from now forward, since it's going to be an intellectual discussion.
Is my Twitter not an intellectual discussion?
Well, considering you have 0 studies that you've posted that actually prove your claims about BPC.
Well, I have a
Yeah.
lifetime of experience in
Oh
pharmaceuticals.
my God, lifetime of experience. The problem is everybody who is in the decentralized space is actually doing these tests and actually measuring biomarkers and actually going and doing things. Pharma takes years and is basically a snail. Yes, it's for safety. Yes, it works in most cases. But what about Oxycontin from oxycodone? That started the opioid crisis. And all that was a change in
Okay.
how long that drug works.
Just one at a time. Okay. I hear what
Okay.
you're saying. Can I ask you how old you are?
26, about to be 27.
Okay. Did you go to college?
2 years, but I had a brain tumor, so I had to kind of put that on hold. And then that's what made me start researching basically everything biology.
Okay. Never worked at a drug company or anything like that, right?
No.
Okay. I guess we can start in on BPC. Maybe that's a good place to start. Do you think that the person or people who made this medicine knew what they were doing?
Well, when you say people who made this medicine, BPC is literally produced in your gastric, fluid.
Okay.
So
Okay, how do you know that?
there's literally studies that show it, and it's
Okay.
where they synthesized it from in the first
So,
place.
so,
As
so
we know, peptides are just a string of amino acids in a very specific format.
right. So how do you know for sure that what they said was true?
Okay, well, how do you know for sure that any study that's ever been posted is true?
There's a crazy thing that we do in science called replication.
Called what?
Replication.
Okay. And then you're going to bring up, random control trials,
No,
right?
no. I'm just really trying to focus on my first question, which is, how do you know that the people who invented this drug knew what they were doing?
I guess, okay, so I'll play devil's advocate. Let's say you don't.
Well,
Where do you go from there?
This happens a lot in medicine. You discard the hypothesis.
Yeah.
You move on. You don't just pray and hope and pretend that, it's positive because you feel like it. You have to be, stringent. Nobody can find this amino acid sequence in any database of amino acid sequences that correspond to any known human protein. This guy is in Croatia. They've published the same stuff for 30 years. Nobody's replicated their work.
Hold on real quick.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm not gonna claim I'm some genius or an intellectual. I'm technically an independent researcher, and I had basically a lucky entrance into the field because of people who are way smarter than me that basically put me on the right path of how to be skeptical in the right context and to include nuance. And in my humble opinion, when you look at the research that is being put out, even in rat studies, there was the rat study where they basically crushed the spine of a rat.
I just want to go back to we can get to that study in a second.
Okay. Yeah.
Like going back to the original first study of the isolation of this compound, I once replicated a science paper. So Science is a good journal. It's not maybe quite as good as Nature, but it's one of the top scientific journals there is. Is the AAAS, of which I'm a member, makes puts out the Science Journal, Science Advances, a bunch of others, Sci Translation Medicine. bunch of good journals. And there was a journal article that explained for the first time how an old pharmaceutical actually works. That's what they purported. Top
Yeah.
university, top journal. We spent a lot of money replicating it, did not work. There's hundreds of papers about the so-called replication crisis, that as much as half of all preclinical experiments don't replicate when done independently. Nobody can find this molecule in gastric juice. Nobody has published that they've isolated this so-called BPC 157 in gastric juice. This is not like some small thing. Like, if you cannot even show that like this alleged molecule exists, that it's actually naturally occurring in any way, which should be very easy to show, that is like just step one of just fraud, right?
Okay, I agree. But at the same time, it's not going to be the same compound because you're having to synthesize it in a different way.
No, it's pretty easy to isolate all amino acids from gastric juice.
Okay, so what about viruses? You know about that theory?
I don't know what that has to do with this.
No, it's not an exact replication. I'm saying it's a similar theoretical proposition. People argue that viruses don't exist because you can't isolate them, but it's because they are in bacteriophages, right?
No,
So
you can isolate viruses. You can sequence the exact genome of the HIV that you might have or something like that.
yeah, but people still don't believe that.
I don't know who doesn't believe that, but I've been in medicine for a long time, and there's HIV drugs that specifically work for specific mutations if you've accrued specific mutations in different
Yeah, depending upon the landscape of your immune system, your genetics and whatnot.
Yeah, stuff like that. So
Yeah.
like you can take huge amount, and people have done this research. People have wanted to know what is in human gastric liquid or fluid or juice, as they say. And there's a number of interesting stuff in there. One of them, is the suite of proteases and peptidases, which cleave amino acids and render most of these peptides, ineffective. Obviously, some of them can be engineered to stay more stable. This molecule is not engineered in any way to be more stable. So I predict its half-life is less than 1 minute.
What, BPC?
Yep. I think it's at best 1 minute, which basically almost immediately disqualifies it as being a drug at all. And
So
when you combine that with what's pretty clear scientific fraud to anybody who's been involved in this field, including short selling stocks of biotech companies, which I've done, developing drugs, which I've done, I don't trust this Croatian group at all. These guys seem like frauds. And I'm just very, very skeptical of
that's valid.
Of this, especially since this drug was moved into human clinical trials and it was never continued again afterwards. If it was any good,
well, it's not patentable.
It is patentable.
You can't patent.
Of course, it's patentable.
You
why isn't it patentable?
Cannot. Well, considering
do you have, hold on,
efficacy.
Hold on, just real quick. Do you have any U.S. patents?
No, of course not.
Okay, I do.
Okay.
Do you think you can tell me what's patentable and what isn't?
Well, I'm telling you specifically from what they're doing.
I have drug patents, right? I've developed drugs and secured dozens of drug patents in my career, right? Like, I know about drug patents, but you want to tell me that this isn't patentable?
Yeah, because this is okay. So let's say we're operating under the assumption that like I said, it's based upon a compound or a peptide that resides in human gastric juice.
Yeah, you can patent that. What do you think GLP is?
Okay, GLP. You know where that came from, right? Of course.
My brother in Christ.
you know where GLP.
You're talking to the pharma bro.
Yes, Gila monster venom.
We have GLP too.
Yes, but it is okay. We have GLP. Where do you know where that resides? Do you know the signaling propagation, where it comes from, where it resides?
What does this have to do with patents?
Because if you're going to let's say this, you're focused on drugs. A peptide is objectively not a drug. It is literally just amino acid chains. So you using the terminology drug is a tactic to denigrate everything that has been researched. Do you know what epitalon and pineolon are?
Listen, I'm just trying to let's stay focused before going
No, I'm
too crazy.
just asking. Have you
Yeah,
heard of those?
let's focus so we don't get so out of control. So
Okay.
you're telling me that you cannot patent a peptide that's naturally occurring, but that is exactly what GLP is.
No,
And
I'm saying that specific one is not going to get patented because it is not going to be profitable for pharma.
wait. So pharma tried to do a BPC study and it failed.
And do you know why? So
I
in the actual study, what was the fail?
the company didn't even disclose it. But the point is, you can patent new formulations of a drug. That's not hard to get a patent. GLP has been patented over the last 30 years. There have been newer companies are still working on new GLP improvements. Like it's very easy to get a patent. What's hard is to get a drug that works. That's the
Yeah,
hard
I
part.
100% agree there.
Patents
That's the bottleneck, right?
patents are easy. Proving a drug works is actually really hard. But when you do prove a drug works, you get to make a lot of money by charging insurance companies huge fortunes, and they say, you know what, this is a really expensive drug, but patient needs it, and they know it works, so I'm going to pay for it. Whereas they won't pay for something that, say, was made up by some random Croatian that's somehow gotten a bunch of people to trick themselves into thinking it's something real.
Okay. So, do you believe that it is a placebo effect that it upregulates VEGF?
So upregulating VEGF is one, not proven to be real, but is also exquisitely dangerous. You do not want to upregulate.
This is where I disagree because it is not a global upregulator of VEGF. It is a homeostatic
So
modulator.
why
It
do you
responds to
believe
cytokine
these?
signaling.
Why do you believe these articles so much?
Okay, why do you believe any article then?
Because I know how to parse what to believe and what not to believe. It's called
Okay, well,
science. You just read them and believe them.
if there are thousands and thousands of people that have been using this peptide for
Oh, let's go
decades.
back to the science real quick because we can talk about the humans too.
Okay.
But you just read these PubMed articles and you think they're gospel. All that shit is.
No, actually, I don't. There are some studies on BPC
How
that
do
are
you
very poorly done.
differentiate between a study you believe and a study you don't? Because this is what we do in pharma. I've had dozens of people work for me getting paid $1 million a year to sit around an office and look at a paper and say, you know what? I believe this versus, you know what? I don't. And when it worked out, I give them a raise, and when it doesn't work out, I fire them. And that's what we do for a living over here. We try to flex that muscle as hard as we can of figuring out what makes a good drug and what doesn't. You read these things and you think that everything the authors say is real. And
That's a baseless assumption, but sure.
well, you're saying that it's a VEGF upregulator. How the fuck do you know?
There's literally rat studies that show.
By who? In
There's
what? In what?
it has to be by the USA or it's
No,
just
it has
bullshit,
to be
right?
by, again, we learned this over time. We learn by doing things. For example, I don't know, you might be in a different field, but in a place like baseball or basketball, for example, sometimes you have a prospect, he's from Duke, and you say, oh, Duke's a good university for basketball. This guy was a D1 player. That's a good sign. When you're published in the Saskatchewan Journal of theoretical peptides, that's not as good as when you're published in Nature. Does it mean that it doesn't work? No, but there's never been
It would just mean that
there's never
that
been
it's
a
just less likely.
there's never been an impressive, legitimate publication of this stuff by anyone. And the only publications that are out there are by the same Croatian group in the same shitty journals without any replication. You just don't know the difference because you're not in medicine.
Okay,
You think
that's
this
fair.
stuff is legit.
Why are said NBA players taking BPC 157 real injuries?
That's we'll talk about the human stuff in a second, but I want you to focus on the fact that you look at a published paper and it's not really, you can't really tell the difference between amazing science and just random bullshit because it's hard and you need experience and you need some burned fingers and to learn that, oh shit, not everything is that simple. Not every, there's 40 million PubMed articles. How many FDA approved drugs are there? It's like about 1,300 novel molecules have ever been approved as drugs. There's a lot of bullshit out there.
Yeah.
And, this qualifies as bullshit. And the way I look at medicine is I start with a story of who discovered this drug. Why did they discover it? How did they discover it? And then I ask myself, how does this drug work? And why does it work for that disease? And then I ask, where are the clinical trials and how does it prove that it works? So you start with this origin, you go to this hypothesis of kind of, how is this all supposed to happen? And then I want to see, show me the proof. All three of those things, if you're missing any of them, it can be a disaster. If you're missing all of them, which is the case here, I've found in my career, there's almost no way that could be a human medicine. It is so hard to make medicine. It just doesn't show up by accident. And this thing basically just showed up by accident. The internet has memed it into reality. No company, drug companies, by the way, do dumb stuff all the time. And drug companies waste money on bullshit all the time. And the fact that no drug company has ever given a shit about this thing, even after all this fuss, it's very telling because all of the parts that I just mentioned just don't hold water. Let's hear from Manish, though. He's been waiting patiently. I just want to make sure we hear from him.
Very good.
Thanks, Martin. Appreciate you doing this. You have a great timeline. It's always very fun to listen to. But I came into this kind of midway. But is the thesis that that there are no peptides that work? There obviously are peptides that work that are FDA approved, like GLP-1s and so are you? I'm trying to clarify your argument. Are you saying that there are no peptides? There aren't any peptides?
You're a cardiologist, so I would hope that like things like BNP.
Yeah, correct. So the thesis is not that there are no peptides that work, right? What is the
well, the word peptide means something different to two different people. So to people skilled in the art, pharmacology people like myself, physicians like yourself, a peptide is just a small protein that generally is less than 40 amino acids. It's generally got a short half-life.
Right.
It's, to me, peptide means non-engineered. So no unnatural amino acids, no conjugations and things like that. There's almost very little, secondary or tertiary structure. That's what a peptide means to me. To everyone else, a peptide, the people I'm referring to as peptide retards, what a peptide is just some shit you bought on some Chinese website that you're going to inject for no fucking reason. That's what a peptide is to those people. So the question, there's a very big difference between, the established medical term. And part of what annoys me about this is that people say peptides like it's some spooky thing when, the first peptides were isolated 100 years ago. And, why don't you care about monoclonal antibodies or, gene therapy or other classes of medicine that are, there's in fact, in pharma, we try to avoid peptides. Peptides are like the worst kind of drug you can have because of their extreme flimsiness, right? We have so many proteases that just clip these things so fast. Peptide half-life is just so tiny that it's very hard to make them into medicines. And now some cases it doesn't matter because you want to use them almost like a hormone. But in a lot of other cases, it's whenever pharma hears the word peptide, they groan because, and I don't mean the second definition, I mean the first one, because they say, I'm going to have to restructure this molecule. It's going to be too metabolically unstable. I'm going to need to make a small molecule, which has, of course, been the gold standard of medicine since medicine started. So when people say peptides, they're really just talking about random stuff throwing the kitchen sink. Sometimes they'll conflate GLPs, which are certainly part of the class of peptides. Sometimes they'll put out drugs that are non-peptidomimetic or non-peptide based, non-amino acid based, and they'll call those peptides, which is obviously just wrong. But clearly there have been, FDA approved prescription drugs that you could, call peptides for a very, very long time. But interestingly, even things like GLP, those aren't pure peptides, right? They have all the liabilities from a pharmaceutical perspective that I mentioned. So the drug companies have re-engineered them pretty dramatically in some cases. For example, Ozempic has a linker and a fatty acid chain. And without that, Ozempic would be worthless. So if you just took the naked peptide, it'd be gone in minutes, and if that, and it'd be, there'd be no pharmaceutical way to exploit it. And that's exactly what BPC is up against. It's a 15 mer, so 15 amino acids, and there's no way that thing just holds for more than a minute. So what receptor are you getting to, and what receptor are you activating? Nobody knows that either. So it's just like
right. No, I think your comment on the fact that there's a tremendous amount of stuff that is just a wallet biopsy to an unsuspecting public that thinks they're getting something is completely valid. And but so that's there. But let me give you a harder case to argue against. Right? Is for instance, take semaglutide, which is Ozempic, which is Wegovy, correct?
Yeah.
Now there's a ton of compounding pharmacies that when with the shortages and all that that were peptides are not, as I understand it, you probably understand this a lot better than I do in terms of how you actually synthesize a peptide and what it takes to go into it. But I mean, just from the proliferation of compounding pharmacies and the access that folks had, clearly there are folks that were making peptides, and even in the hands of physicians who are prescribing compounding peptides at the time of shortages, still now, but much less. It was clearly working for patients, right? So then the next step, but that's of course something that you would say, hey, FDA has approved it. They've gone through some trials to show safety and all that stuff, which is great. But take the harder case of, say, something like retatrutide, right? Retatrutide is, hitting GLP, GIP, and glucagon. There's of course some preliminary trials that suggest benefit, and of course you can get retatrutide from a lot of these peptide companies, correct? Would you fault somebody from, somebody who, say, does not have, well, insurance is pretty much dropping coverage for most of these peptides, but you can clearly get them much cheaper from these peptide companies. I mean, I as a physician would have a difficult time, say, yeah, I mean, it's faulting somebody for saying, hey, retatrutide probably works. I can't afford it to get it through the conventional route. I'm just going to go get this peptide and do that. That again, that's not legal. It's it's labeled for animal purposes only. I'm just describing.
Also,
I'm not something I'm doing. I'm just describing what's happening.
I think it's also,
but in terms of
to me, it's wildly unethical. So Eli Lilly spent $1 billion inventing something, and just saying, "Ooh, I like that. I'm gonna smash and grab that." It's no different from stealing a Gucci bag. You can get Ozempic. They sell. Let me finish. They sell $20 billion of Ozempic, right? They sell $30 billion of Mounjaro. People are getting it. It's not impossible to get. It's not that unaffordable. But if you want the shiny new guy and you want it for cheap, I mean, you're not that different from a guy who goes in the Gucci store, punches the security guard, and walks out with three handbags. And if you keep doing that, well, the Gucci store is going to install a door, and it's going to install a lock, and it's going to install cameras and 3 security guards, and eventually you're not going to be able to smash and grab the Gucci bags. And eventually Gucci might say, you know what, let's get into a different line of business, which is not what you want for medicine. And furthermore, you obviously don't know what the retatrutide, quote unquote, is that you're getting in the first place, because it's not necessarily clear that you're getting what you'd like to get or what you want to get. So I think that this whole thing's a bit of a mess, in the sense that the average doctor would never say, oh, go get your drug from some random online pharmacy, and maybe the stuff is real, maybe it isn't, good luck, when I can write you a prescription. Obviously it's malpractice practically. So nobody's doing that. So people are just deciding for themselves that this is a good idea, that I want to be in charge of my own prescription drugs, and I'd like to do this. And to me, it's much more psychological than it is related to medicine.
Yeah, Martin, isn't that a different question? No, you're not, and that's a great conversation to have separately about the ethics and patents and going around patents and that's what anyway, FDA, HIMSS, that whole thing that they did. But that's a separate question from what I guess the point of your discussion is today. The point of the discussion is, or I thought you were having, was, are there peptides? Are there peptides that work, or is everyone that takes a peptide a retard?
That's
no,
what I
I mean,
to use your.
I think it's pretty.
To use your
but like
thing.
Again, I mean, I thought you understood. understood this.
No, specific. I'm not saying. I'm just specific. I'm giving you a specific case. I'm not saying everyone go take some peptide. I'm saying
I'm
I
still
agreed with
surprised
you
you
and
don't.
said,
I'm
yeah.
still surprised you don't pick this up, because I think
Okay.
that, when pharma makes medicine, you can categorize that in different classes. So there's 6,400 FDA approved drugs roughly. So if you want to classify the molecules, I would say half of them are small molecules, which means non-amino acid related, below 1,000 molecular weight, usually some kind of Lipinski style like score that's good, metabolically stable, not too, obviously those rules are meant to be broken too, but they're the rule of 5 type drugs. Those are small molecules. About half of all medicines are that. I would say 30% are monoclonal antibodies. So those are drugs that are obviously made biological factories, E. coli, usually CHO, and they have some biological target, and they're injected, and they're great drugs. Then of the 20% or so that are remaining, you have sort of largish molecules, recombinant proteins, peptides, viruses, etc. Peptides are just a class of molecules. There's nothing special about them inherently. Some peptides are drugs. Most are not, right? Like, this isn't, I don't know what's ambiguous about this. Like, when somebody says peptides from like some overseas factory, if they're referring to a drug that's FDA approved or about to be FDA approved, then sure, that drug works, if they're getting what they think they're getting. So like, if somebody makes a perfect copy of retatrutide, that's going to be a really potent weight loss drug. But you're taking an Eli Lilly pharmaceutical, right? That is not, it's no different from getting, waiting a year and going and getting a prescription for retatrutide, or taking a less powerful but still really powerful drug like tirzepatide or semaglutide, which again, this is just medicine. We've been calling that medicine for 70 years.
No question. But so you're saying that yes, retatrutide probably works. Tirzepatide, semaglutide probably work for weight loss, and
they're FDA
indications that have
approved.
been approved. Yeah, they're FDA approved for that. Yeah, absolutely. But so the argument is not do peptides work or not, but that people should not use those peptides because that would be some unethical.
No,
is what the argument is.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, look, GLPs are obviously an amazing class of medicines that were invented by pharma and were tested by pharma, and they work by pharma. Whether or not you want to pirate those is up to the person. You can pirate them by getting them in Mexico, for example, for less. You can pirate them by getting them as research chemicals for even less. Each one provides its own risk. When a lot of people talk about peptides, they're not really clear what they mean by that, as I said earlier. Sometimes they think of things like BPC, which is like, oh, well, it's an amino acid sequence. I'm going to somehow try to import some of the positive properties of GLP and magic wand anoint this random peptide with some of the benefits of GLP. And it doesn't make a lot of sense, because one antibody is no better or worse than any other antibody because it's an antibody, right? It's sort of like saying, it's just such a weird sort of thing to do. It's like, I don't know, comparing a Ferrari and saying that's a car to a kid's soapbox boxcar, literally cardboard box, and saying, well, mine's a car too. And it's sort of like, well, yeah, we're both cars technically, but yours is made out of cardboard and cut out wheels from, I don't know, take whatever circle you want, versus, mine is a precision-made machine by a company, and it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it can ride in the street legally. They're both cars, and I think that the willingness to sort of import from one class into another the properties of the class, that's sort of tempting for people who are looking at unknown peptides, uncharacterized peptides, poorly characterized peptides, drugs that have not been in clinical trials, things like that, and conflate them with retatrutide, which Eli Lilly's literally spent maybe $2 billion on. And that's a very, very, very different story from BPC. And again, for a lot of people, for the peptide retards, of which many are here, it doesn't really matter if the drug's a peptide at all. If it's from some shady offshore source and I'm not supposed to have it, that's a peptide to me. And again, it's a funny use of the term because the term is very scientifically specific, but that's how some people use it. And so there's a gradation of kind of like, what exactly are we even saying here? But let me add some other people just because I want to make sure that everyone gets.
I actually have to go in a second. I do still appreciate the conversation, regardless.
Sure.
But I have a quick question.
Okay.
Have you heard of Cavinson? Do you know about his work in Russia?
No.
Okay, so
I know a lot of
I
scientists.
recommend, and I'm not bullshitting or anything. I'm actually serious. I think you should look into it because there are transporters in the gut specifically for peptide chains, but they're only working for tri or tetrapeptides, right? That would be pineolon and epitalon, vilon, etc.
Yeah.
These peptides are proven in those studies to upregulate telomerase activity.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Am I you want me to send you some studies like they're proven?
Telomerase? Are you joking right now?
Yeah,
You
they
sound like
modulate
you're brand new. No offense.
Okay, that's fine. Well, look up his research
No.
because there's 40 years
I've
of
spent
research
20
behind it.
I spent 25 years learning how to look up research and sort it and like look for the best stuff. I know how to do this.
But you've never heard of his research.
No, it sounds like
So
garbage.
why? Explain
Because
to me why.
just saying telomerase immediately sounds
No,
like garbage.
no. Explain to me why.
Yeah, telomerase
Don't.
is a meme. It's not a
Why?
it's
Can you
not a
explain
molecular
why?
target.
Why is it a meme?
It's because there's no way to directly interact with telomerase, especially with the 4 amino acids.
It's not a direct. It's not.
Of course, it's indirect because it's garbage.
Okay. Well,
You got to learn
interesting
medicine, man.
because
You
all
just
these
want
people
to.
are actually taking them and their sleep is improving
I'm glad for those
by
people.
3 times. So
They sound like geniuses.
no, they sound like people who are tired of the bullshit pharma.
You sound like
Making
you should
money,
go to
off of
the No
people's
Kings
diseases, and
protest
then we're
now.
supposed to trust
No
people like you who
Kings.
profit from that.
You got to go to the
No,
No
I'm
Kings
not a
protest
libtard,
next.
bro. I'm not a fucking libtard.
Yes, you are.
Sorry.
Yes, you are.
No, sorry.
No,
Sorry, I'm not.
you sound
I'm not a
retarded.
fucking liberal retard
You do
who,
sound retarded.
well, that's an opinion of yours. That's
Yeah,
not.
I think most people, if we voted right now, would say that you sound retarded.
Well, most people in this call are basically sucking your dick. So I hate to break it to
I
you.
think
It doesn't
that
really have any volition.
the reason we're in that position is because the things you say don't make any sense. And that
Because you're not actually doing the research on fringe
no,
things.
you don't know how to do the research, right? It's like I said,
Okay. So in 5 years, hypothetically, in 5 years, if BPC gets patented, what are you gonna say?
Well,
I'm sorry, guys. I was just
again,
wrong.
your phrases are wrong. Like patent, you can file a patent tomorrow and you can get it
Oh,
approved.
okay. So let's be more specific.
18 hours. No,
It
it's
gets
not more
approved
specific.
by
It's
the
just you just don't know what
FDA.
the fuck you're saying.
It gets approved by the FDA. What are you gonna say?
Yeah, if BPC gets approved by the FDA, I'd be very surprised.
Okay.
I think the
That's
odds of that are virtually zero.
Okay, that's fine. Well, like I said, look up Cavinson. If you don't want to, that's fine. But that just
You should go
shows.
get a degree in biology and
Okay.
pharmacology and go study and read some textbooks, and then maybe you'll understand what the fuck you're talking about.
Okay.
Because just reading on your own, without any education or background in this, without, I don't know, starting a drug company, talking to hundreds of PhDs and working with them to make medicine all day long, you should try that. And then you can read this stuff while having a fucking clue.
Okay. Okay.
That's what I recommend. I have a software company now. Do you think I just showed up and started telling everybody how to write software? No.
You're using the intelligence of other people with actual skin in the game.
And I slowly and painfully programmed over a very long period of time. And I learned to get better and better slowly and carefully. And I never once went to my CTO and said, I'm a better programmer than you. Or I know how to do this and you don't.
Okay.
A little intellectual humility wouldn't kill you.
I agree. And I said at the beginning, I'm not claiming to be a genius. I'm claiming to be somebody who is just skeptical of the modern narrative. But I also would like to hear you debate Abood Bakri because
I'll
he
debate.
actually
Listen,
has.
I'll debate any of these people.
Okay.
That's why
That's
I'm
okay.
doing this. That's why I'm
No,
doing
I
this.
think that's a good thing. I think the entire dialogue is amazing
There's
for
there's
everybody.
there's a reason none of these people want to discuss this stuff with an actual pharmaceutical expert. Because the people at Pfizer and Merck and Lilly will laugh at these idiots because they've never accomplished a single fucking thing in their life.
Okay,
Because
but
let me
appealing
finish.
to
Let me finish.
appealing
Let me
to
finish.
already
Let me finish. Let me
accomplishment
finish.
doesn't really.
Getting a
Okay.
drug, getting a drug FDA approved is an odyssey that very very few human beings have ever been able to do.
Yeah.
You can work in pharma for your whole life and
And
never touch
never,
it,
yeah, and never even get it a
touch an
chance to
FDA
do
approved
that.
drug.
Yeah.
And that's something that, I have the pleasure of having that distinction. So does Vivek on many molecules. And,
Wait, hold on. Are you talking about Vivek Ramaswamy?
yeah.
You mean the guy? Oh man. Okay.
What about
You
him?
mean the guy that literally knew the drug didn't work and still, tried to get through to get money and profited from the actual fucking
Well,
mishaps that came from it?
Vivek's, I don't know if you know Vivek's story too well. It sounds like you're thinking about his
I
all.
know, I know about his mom and her
It
connections,
sounds like you
but
know mostly about the Alzheimer's drug and not
yes.
the other drugs that he's come out with. He's gotten like 10 drugs FDA approved.
Can you name a few so I can actually like
Yeah,
go
yeah,
look
yeah.
up?
Yeah, so his one of his biggest successes was this company called Myovant, and Myovant, has this drug called Orgovix for prostate cancer, and yeah, Myovant was,
Oh yeah, yeah, I see it.
but Myovant was also got Myfembry approved. This is um, their women's health drug, and yeah, so Vivek's done it. I mean, Vivek's done the real thing, and he's gotten a bunch of these approved, and yeah, he's put a lot of money into them, and he's had failures too, just as we all have. But yeah, Vivek's portfolio, you know, is, I think he's had a pretty decent track record. But he's done small molecules, antibodies. He's sort of done it all. And pharma is sort of a boring industry that's not that exciting, and it's difficult and frustrating. And I think the desire to like sex it up and try to make it like fun or fast, like tech or crypto or something, it's
Yeah,
just
I
like,
agree. I don't think that's the way. I
this
mean,
is a
because we're
very,
talking about human health, we're talking about people's
yeah,
lives,
yeah.
you know.
Well,
So
that's why if somebody wanted to take BPC and just simply report its half-life in human beings, I'd be impressed. But let alone do a clinical trial, find its mechanism of action, do crystallography work. Like there's real science that you can do here. Nobody's doing it, and I'm very suspicious of these Croatian guys. I think that I've seen scientific fraud before, and I don't think anybody should trust what they're
so
putting up.
what do you think?
Can
And
I just
I'm not being disingenuous. I'm genuinely asking.
Yeah, I
What do you
just want to
think
move
their
on to other
Okay,
guys, but please go.
yeah, that's fine. So what do you think their goal is by doing this?
Yeah, scientists are funny people. I've seen, so there's one scientist that got arrested in this company that I shorted. It's my pinned tweet called Cassava. And
Hmm.
basically this guy had been, he faked all of his research. This drug is completely fake. I shorted the stock, I made millions of dollars because I found that this drug didn't bind to the target that they said it binded to. In fact, there was no scientific way for it to do so. And nevertheless, the company persisted telling these lies. The CEO had to step down. He got charged by the SEC. But the chief scientific officer not just had to step down, but he got arrested by the federal government for faking his data.
Yep.
I think there's some there's academic fraud is almost so commonplace now that it's accepted. And that's why we have a replication crisis where, preclinical data can be easily, on the borderline of fraud. Let me give you a funny example. So if you're testing a mouse and the mouse's ability or the rat's ability to survive something called a rotarod. Rotarod is a funny little experiment. You put the mouse on this device and you see how long, it's like American Gladiators for mice. you see how long, he can balance himself on the rotorod.
Yeah.
And rotorod, he'll fall off eventually, but the rotorod time is a measure of how long the mouse can, basically muscle function and things like that. Now, let's say you have a new drug, okay, and you have placebo, and you put the placebo in the rotorod, give it to the mouse, you put the placebo in the mouse, and then you put the mouse in the rotorod, and you do 3 measurements, and it's 2 minutes, 2 minutes, and 2 minutes. Maybe it's 1:57, 2 minutes, 3 seconds, and 2 minutes, 1 second. You average them out. And then you give him BPC, and you say, all right, mouse, time for the rotorod. And he falls off right away.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, you know what, we're not going to count that one. And you do it again. And it's 2 minutes and 3 seconds. And you say, I don't know, I must have done that one the wrong way. Let me try this again. And eventually you get a 3-minute rotorod finding. You publish it, and did you lie? I mean, I think that's fraud. But
I would agree, because you're basically cherry picking what you think worked better. It's like, oh, this is complete evidential proof.
Did the mouse do 3 minutes on the rotorod? And the answer is yes, technically he did. And if you want to sort of do experiments that way, you get a reputation for not being a good scientist, and you don't get published in a good journal. And people like Jennifer Doudna or George Church, they get fast-tracked to top journals because their group, their scientific group, has a reputation for good work, and people have replicated that good work. You get stuck in random international journals that nobody's read when you don't have that reputation, when you haven't been scientifically, cleared as somebody that's legit. If you've made 10 drugs in your group that pharma's licensed, that look really great, they're really intelligent, then you have that, the benefit of the doubt. When you're just some random group nobody's heard of, and your only claim to fame is some drug nobody can really replicate, and I think that you lose that. Anyway, Frank, you're on.
Hey, what's up, man? I was actually wondering what your stack is. Like, I understand the criticisms, but I'm curious if you are experimenting with stuff. Yeah.
So I read books. I get a good night of sleep. I try not to be a total retard. And that's it.
And do you feel like that's because you've read so much about this and you're worried about side effects, or you have no interest in it, or like what leads to that as a conclusion?
I'm a healthy person, so I don't need medicine for fucking random reasons, right? I'm literally a 43-year-old normal male. I don't need medicine. You should not want to try medicine unless you have a disease that you're trying to treat, right? Like what the fuck is wrong with people?
But I guess the counter to this is like, again, even if, let's say, BPC, all these things you're saying are accurate, some people enjoy like the marginal result, even if it's not directly curing something. Do you think that there's risk involved in that, or do you feel like it's more of a cycle? Like what you're describing is kind of more of a psychological, like, oh, I don't need medicine, I do need medicine. What's your take on all that?
Well, there's a bunch of scattered questions in this. So the first one that jumps to mind is this idea of a marginal benefit. Statistics exists for a reason, and biostatistics is a field. In statistics, you're trying to prove the effect size of a medicine. There's huge textbooks on biostatistics, and in fact, a big part of what I do when I short a biotech stock is I'm trying to understand what the effect size is, sometimes called Cohen's d-value, which is what is my effect over its variance. And so if depression varies by 3 points on a scale, and the mean change I get on this scale is 1 point, well, that's a pretty weak scale if 1 sigma is 3 points. I'm getting a third of a sigma, big deal. If I get 10 points, I'm getting 3 sigma. That means I'm taking the average person and moving them in huge across the distribution from the most depressed to the least depressed. That's a real drug. That's exciting. SSRIs, unfortunately, are more like 1 point. And so when you talk about marginal effect, usually there's no effect in most of these drugs. The marginal effect that you think you're observing isn't real. That's a placebo effect. You might observe a huge effect for yourself it's still a placebo effect. There's a normal distribution around what you might observe. And unless you have a control group, you can't divine the distributions out of your ass. You need data, and we don't have data. So if somebody thinks that they're tricking themselves into thinking that their quote unquote stack is helping them in some way, they're doing so in a way that's, just fooling themselves. And if somebody wants to fool themselves into thinking that, they're Dr. House and, that they are some like brilliant self-diagnosing physician, self-treating physician, God bless them. Now, there are drugs that are FDA approved that do things like, say modafinil or something like that. And some people might say, well, I know modafinil is supposed to be used by these people, but I'm taking it anyway because I think it benefits me in this way. And then I also take Vyvanse, and I also do this and I do that. Well, there's certainly nothing wrong with trying those things. I think it's a very, unhealthy and dangerous thing to do. Medicine is meant to help people who are sick to get slightly better. Ideally a lot better, but unfortunately drugs just aren't that great. A lot of the best drugs out there, the one drug that I have claim of like proof of ownership of is a drug that lowers kidney proteinuria, or sort of kidney diseases that cause proteinuria. It lowers proteinuria very modestly. I was looking the other day and I was surprised that it's selling $400 million a year and still growing rapidly, because it's really a pretty shitty drug, to be frank. And nevertheless, people with kidney disease, if your kidney's failing, you take anything you can get. And ultimately, I mentioned SSRIs earlier, you get a point out of, 3 points is 1 sigma. That's not very good, but it's better than 0 points. If you're very sad or suicidal or something like that, then I'll take a point. So I think that, this goal of trying to like optimize your own health, is laudable, but most of the time when people are doing it, like Brian Johnson or others, it's this very unscientific thing, and they're trying to be scientific sometimes, which is again applaudable and laudable, but it's very easy to forget that humans are very bad at statistics. When you are being chased by a wild pack of hyenas, you don't sit there and think statistically, you just run. We're very bad at things like statistics and mean and just trying to like calculate, different, statistical approaches. We tend to want to go with patterns and simpler things like that for us to understand. We don't think about Cohen's d-value or distributions. We think about things in the binary, and that's not how medicine works. So many drugs have failed when people have told me, Martin, I know for sure this drug works. Even doctors who are in the clinical trial have told me, I've never seen a drug like this for IBS. I remember this like yesterday. It was 22 years ago, and it was for my boss's roommate's drug for constipation. And I talked to some doctors, and I said, hey, Steve, these doctors are telling me this drug's gonna work, and that they've never seen anything like it. And it's a blinded clinical trial, but they think that they think it works. And I was skeptical anyway, and the drug failed completely, did not even beat placebo. And the number of stories like that are out there are massive numbers. I mean, and still people don't understand statistics. Like a good example is this cassava that I was talking about earlier, the one where they arrested the chief scientist, where they did a study of the drug in Alzheimer's, and some of the people in this Alzheimer's trial were declining less slowly than maybe you would expect. And the bulls on the stock, which is like a lot of retail investors, and no serious investor would touch it, the bulls were sort of like, well, look, this is evidence it's working. But they were taking a part of the people who were taking the drug, not the entire patient population, the entire sample. They were cutting the sample down. And when you do that, you lose what's called alpha in statistics, nothing to do with finance, and you lose the power to detect these things, and you're doing multiple comparisons, and you have to adjust for multiple comparisons. So this is Bonferroni error correction. And this error correction is something that's really not obvious to the human mind, but if you sit and think about it, you can't just take multiple looks at a test. For example, in a sports game, we all know the primary endpoint of a basketball game is points scored at the end of the game. You can't say, hey, Frank, I'll bet you $5,000 the Knicks are going to win. And when the Knicks lose, and say, well, I really meant at halftime. or I really meant at the third quarter, or I really meant how many rebounds Patrick Ewing would get.
So do you feel like your issue is more with the financial fraud that surrounds a lot of this than, like let's say some guy that likes BPC, he feels like it makes his muscles feel better or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I think that guy's wrong, and he's an idiot, and he's taking a random medicine and praying for relief. I feel tremendous empathy for people who are sick. I got into pharma for partially that reason. I want people to win. I want people to get better, but this isn't the way. This is a road to perdition. This is the road to serfdom. In fact, I mean, it really is like there's some guy somewhere in India, rubbing his hands and saying, look at these fucking idiots. They're paying me money to take these things that don't work. And in parts of Asia and China and so forth, and they're just like, look at these morons. And I think they're very happy to either be malicious or be, sort of like accidentally or simultaneously kind of like in a position where they're purveying it and supporting it, and they maybe even have good vibes around it, like their intent is good, but they should know better that this is not medicine. And the real question here is, why are we so excited about stuff like this? And I think the answer is that we want new ways to do medicine. And I think that that's kind of the issue here, at stake here, is that we don't like this whole phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 thing. We don't like pharma. We don't like all of this sort of like substance and rigor that goes into pharma. And I think we tend to, in addition to that, we know that pharma doesn't really care about certain diseases. Traditionally, muscle repair, for example, has been completely neglected by pharma because it's mostly not a pharma relevant thing. There's some systems in the body that are like applicable at a molecular level, a nanomolecular level, a nanoscale. That's where drugs operate, in the angstrom scale. But things like muscles are collections of tissue that are composed of smaller parts down to the cell level. They're really like abstractions, layers of abstractions away from pharma, to the point where like drugs often can't do very much for some of those illnesses, like bone disease and pain, muscle pain, are really, really hard for pharma to get really much out of in terms of repairing tissue. So it's frustrating that there are no drugs for, say, osteoarthritis, actual osteoarthritis progression, as opposed to, say, osteoarthritic pain, of which there are a number of drugs. But the actual underlying cause of like your bone grinding against its joint, like there's nothing drugs can do for that. And, there are things medical devices can do and things like that, but like we're frustrated by that, and we want to like see if there's a way, through some undiscovered, medicine that some guy did in some country, and let me experiment and do it myself. And the boldness and courageousness of like doing that is also commendable, and like it urges this like priority of like, no, I'm going to take matters into my own hands, which is great. I love the, agenticness of that, the agency of that. But I think that, there's still a reason pharma's done it the way it's done it. Pharma's not like, oh, we want to make less profit, or we want to make drugs slowly. Every single thing we do that we can to optimize how fast we can get a drug out is done. There's nobody sitting there with their feet up, saying, I can wait another year. In fact, it's really tough in pharma because we have a very finite patent window. So we got to get while the going's good and get this thing out there as fast as we can. So,
So it seems like a lot of what you're talking about is this idea of someone that's actually sick or not. But then you look this year at someone like Clav, who's gotten really famous, Clavicular.
Yes, I know
And
him.
his take is more like, oh, just being ugly is being sick. And so you should do everything that you can to not be ugly because your life gets infinitely better. Now, I don't think that would be considered a medical sickness, but what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, this guy did a video about me the other day. I mean, I'm going to go down to Miami and throw him in a volcano. I have a friend with osteogenesis imperfecta. He's had 400 broken bones in his life. I know 3 kids who are dying of pantothenic kinase associated neurodegeneration. They can't move. They're writhe in pain every day. a lot of people out there have never been sick. They don't know people who've been sick. And when you meet people like that, your life changes because you realize just how lucky you have it. And it's a disgrace to be young and healthy and beautiful and full of life and look at a dying boy like these Kulsrud brothers that I talk about sometimes that are in their teens and they don't look normal. They need a wagon to get around. They can't move. They have no muscle tone. You look at somebody like that and you have to be a real son of a bitch to talk about being ugly is an illness. That's it's just sad. So anyway, let's move on to Dom or some other folks. Thank you, Frank.
Oh, is my mic on? Okay. So I mean, I just have like a retarded anecdotal evidence. I mean, I've been doing Ironman triathlon for the last 6, 7 years, and in the context of like PEDs, like I know some professional athletes that take them and they get like insane amounts of performance on top of all their training. And actually, I think it was the Russians that pioneered peptides for recovery, for growth hormone, and things of that sort. So how do
I think it
you
was God that pioneered growth hormone, but that's just me.
well, the synthetic growth hormone or a growth hormone releasing peptide rather,
Yeah, I
GHRP.
mean, growth hormone came from Genentech technically, on the synthetic side, but yeah.
But I mean, like if if whatever the Olympic these consortiums that ban PEDs, like if all the peptides are on that list, like how do you if they're
Well,
banned?
all of the peptides means 20 to the nth power, combinations of amino acids.
Well, I
Right.
would say like the growth hormone releasing peptide,
Yeah,
like
so
BPC
I know a lot about growth hormone.
157.
So growth hormone is a funny story. Growth hormone had been made by companies like Novo Nordisk with animals, the same way everybody made peptides before recombinant DNA technology was released. So what's interesting about growth hormone is it's a protein. It's not a peptide. It's a
Well, no,
large.
not
I know.
not
Listen, I know you know. I'm just giving you the story.
sure.
So let's talk about GHRH in a minute, which I also know a lot about. So anyway, growth hormone was around, and then finally Genentech came up with neutropin, and neutropin was a huge advance. Genentech also made the first insulin for Eli Lilly. So there's this big renaissance in the 70s where proteins could be made, and even proteins you'd probably call peptides could still be made in high volumes with recombinant DNA technology, and it made Genentech a star. Of course, HGH was given an FDA approved for short stature, but up to at least a third of what people used HGH for was for bodybuilding. But nevertheless, short stature, which is sort of hardly a disease, and I think the FDA struggled a lot with, why is this an illness per se? Some people are short and some people are tall, but it was something that parents really wanted to have their children grow. And to this day, parents have their kids inject, some cases daily. It's now gotten a little better, but it's still, pretty, to me, crude and crazy that if your child is in the 50 percentile or below or whatever of growth velocity, that you say, okay, let me get this FDA-approved drug for this disease of just being short. And that's prevailed to this day, right? There's still new growth hormone drugs being developed for this exact quote-unquote illness. And again, these are dollars that could be spent in other areas of medicine, like some of the ones I've talked about a minute ago. And then you have the bodybuilders. So they've taken growth hormone and they use it, for their purposes. They lose weight and they gain muscle and things like that. And there are a number of growth hormone adjacent drugs like GHRHs. And you can even make small molecules of these where basically you're still ultimately doing the same thing. These drugs can be used for short stature as well. And there really is not much of a difference, in my opinion, between these. You can get a peptide out of a GHRH. Mimetics and you still more or less are doing the same thing biologically. So, ultimately, the debate as to whether or not there's a difference between growth hormone releasing hormone and growth hormone itself, and this, by the way, sort of exists across all hormones. There's often like this cascade of hormone release, and testosterone comes to mind, where it's like, do you want the molecule that makes the testosterone to increase, or do you want the testosterone itself? And does it even matter is an important question across tons of different hormone classes. In my opinion, in general, it doesn't matter. The body is rheostasis, homeostasis. It'll figure out that it has to stop making things, and it's very hard to avoid that kind of like feedback mechanism. Now, some people really do believe that there's a difference. Regardless, those peptides belong in the firmament of pharma, right? They were FDA approved. In fact, GRH drugs were something that I spent some time on because I almost bought this company that was developing one, and spent a lot of time thinking about how is this gonna work, and is it something where so the drug, for what it's worth, is called Egrifta, tesamorelin, and it was approved, interestingly, for reducing fat or lipodystrophy in HIV patients. And this is sort of something similar to short stature, and in the sense that HGH is used for bodybuilding. So this is a bit of like a bodybuilder drug. In fact, a bunch of these GHRHs are bodybuilder drugs, but so is HGH. So it's just a very like funny world in HGH and GHRH, where they're performance enhancers, but so is EPO. EPO is one of the first recombinant proteins ever produced by Amgen, and EPO is a 265 amino acid hormone, and EPO binds the EPO receptor, and it begins hematopoiesis, which is a generation of mostly red blood cells for oxygen carrying. So EPO has been used by cyclists forever. And then there have been new ways to stimulate the EPO receptor, and those were used by cyclists too. So the doping in those communities, they're very crafty at using all kinds of drugs. So some of the EPO mimetics are not even peptidomimetic. They're full small molecules. And those guys will use anything to get an advantage. That's the nature of sports. And so let them do that, I suppose. That's not medicine to me. That's, sports guys wanting to be the best at what they do, and that's fine. That's up to them and the laws that regulate them and things like that. I take no position. But I feel like, looking at that and trying to like relate that to medicine is very odd to me, because for so many people, I think your point rings home, which is that people aren't looking to feel better necessarily. They're looking to performance enhance, and they're not athletes, right? It's Joe in HR. Like, what is Joe in HR trying to performance enhance for? What is he doing that's so important that he needs performance enhancing? I talk to a lot of CEOs where they want to performance enhance because they want to have revenue grow or invent something cool or whatever. And I worry that, in essence, some of these people are just addicting themselves to weird drugs that are, often psychotropic, because you don't need big muscles as a CEO. You don't need to lift things or run faster. You need to read a lot or stay up late, but some of those things are pretty dangerous. Do you want to stay up for, just doing 3 hours of sleep a day? Is that a good idea? I think that could be really corrosive and dangerous, and you can end up looking more like a druggie than you can look like a CEO. So to me, I'm sort of generally against this stuff, and I think a lot of people in the crypto community are very, frank. Member of that community. I when I was talking more to crypto people, like, you would hear this all the time, like, hey, do you guys need Vyvanse? Here, I have a bunch of Vyvanse on me, and I'm just looking at these people like, are you nuts? Like, you want me to just take random Vyvanse for no fucking reason, just to, why? And I think that, trying to like popularize taking medicine to change your life, is something pharma's been trying to do forever, and apparently it was this easy. But old saying, better living through chemistry, It was Pfizer or Merck's logo. I forget what it was, but it's important to actually be sick, I think, first to want medicine, or is something that you really want to improve, like your skin complexion or something like that. There's sort of different versions of what medicine means to people. And I think for me, I'm all the way on the left end of that, which is you have a kid dying of a genetic rare disease, that's medicine. You have something like GLP, you're starting to straddle cosmeceuticals of like weight loss versus, I know a girl who's 120 pounds who wants Ozempic, and it's, I'm just trying to figure out what the heck, and again, what's medicine for is a philosophical question. Like, if it means that it's for the crypto bro that wants to think that he's, gaining some intellectual advantage or something, maybe that is medicine. To me, the best kind of medicine is the person who's dying. My old office manager for my drug company just got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and she's asking me for advice, and it's a really bad situation. She's very young. She's my age. She's not very, very young, but she's young, and it looks bad. It looks like she's going to die, and it's that's the typical course, of course, for pancreatic. And even though they caught it early, it looks like she's going to die. So that's medicine to me, and I think nobody would disagree that the person who's dying of a rare disease and needs to be wheeled around in a wagon has a very different situation from clavicular. But I also don't want to diminish things like that, where like, look, somebody could have a big one that I've been talking about recently is premature ejaculation, which is according to the FDA, not a disease. And there was a drug company that tried to get a drug approved for premature ejaculation. Now, we do have an FDA approval for erectile dysfunction, which is kind of the opposite problem. But premature ejaculation is where the FDA drew the line. They said that's not an illness. And again, you can be cynical and say maybe that's because of lobbying. Pfizer lobbied pretty hard to get impotence or erectile dysfunction approvable as an indication. This makes your, this is a medicine that will make it easier for you to have a child. That sounds like an important thing. The medicine for Depoxetine, which Johnson & Johnson, believe it or not, one of the biggest drug companies in the world, had in their pipeline for a while. J&J was developing it for premature ejaculation, and it was an SSRI, ironically, and it was very safe, very effective. It elongated the time it took to ejaculate, and the FDA said this just isn't a disease. We don't believe that people need this. Now, put yourself in the mind of somebody with this illness. I can imagine for some people this is a terrifying, horrible thing, where they want to, meet a significant other, and they're embarrassed by this situation, and they want a medicine that can fix it. And it can be more severe than somebody else's multiple sclerosis. If it really gets into their head and really makes it hard for them to, meet people, and maybe they get depressed and they start, not even wanting to go out and meet anybody anyway, feel really fatal about it. And it can be a truly, overwhelming thing. Now, there are many things like that. Baldness is a good example. Baldness is not a medical condition. It's an appearance thing. But we all know that if there was a good drug for baldness, it'd sell a hell of a lot. So I think the definition of what is medicine exactly, to your point, Dom, of like, you run, triathlons or marathons, I think you said?
Yeah, like ultra distance, so Ironman.
Yeah. That's hard stuff. I couldn't run up the flight of stairs right now. But I think that that's a really, like, being able to do that would be really cool. Would I take a drug that would let me do that hypothetically, which I know is not what you do, but like, would you want to take a drug that makes you train 50% longer or harder? A lot of people would, but at some point you want to, you think about drawing the line of like, what is medicine and what is like sort of semi-frivolous, and then what's completely frivolous. And at some point, to me, we're talking about different things. And I'm not thumbing my nose at people who want to try like this cosmeceutical, like, twilight. But to me, you are starting to, for some of these people, you're starting to get into a world of, I hate to say this, but like some of the people I know who are addicted to drugs, they're like, well, weed makes me calm down or something like that. And then they're like, well, this drug, makes me feel this way, closer to nature or something like that. And I'm just sitting there kind of like suspicious of like, is this person just a drug addict? And, at what point are they just sort of, coping and trying to explain their addiction through these substances that they've gotten hooked on? I'm talking about real hardcore drugs too, not just weed. So I don't know. To me, that's pharmacology in a way. It's medicine in a way, but we're moving very far away from like the best things medicine do, like cystic fibrosis and the cure for CF by Vertex, and some cancer drugs, obviously, that have done really well, and then going into PEDs and that stuff. So very long-winded way of saying like these are different things in some ways, but I'm curious what you think.
Well, no, I thought because I joined the conversation late, so I didn't really know what the argument was. I thought the argument was that they don't work. But I mean, I certainly have anecdotal
Yeah,
evidence.
everyone's confused about this, which is funny to me because, again, peptides are the first, some of the first medicines known to man. I think that's clear.
But even in like a PED context, like if you just take peptides and go to the gym for 40 minutes, like you're not going to really see any results anyway. Like you actually have to put in a lot of work, and
I
you got
think
to
I
go
think
through pain, like
what's not
with
coming
all
through
types of
here.
PEDs.
It's funny because it's not coming through here for Doctor, who was just here, and others. Like peptide is a class of molecules, right? Like within that class, they're the perfect drug all the way down to stuff that is not a drug. It's just garbage. It doesn't do anything, and everything sort of in between. Most things are either all the way on the left or all the way on the right, but there are stuff that's in between too. And peptide just doesn't mean anything more or less than that.
I think when I say peptide, I mean like the BPCs, the TB500s, the CJC, whatever's ipamorelin, tesamorelin,
Whoa! So
sermorelin.
those are really different things, right? Tesamorelin is FDA approved. I almost own that company, and that's a drug that's been through human clinical trials, was designed and created by a drug company. Like that's a medicine. BPC is some random slop. They're both peptides in the same way that my son's soapbox car is also a Ferrari. He likes to ride around this thing. It's made of wood. It is not something that's going to go 60 miles an hour or 160 miles an hour. But they're both cars in a way. I think like the word peptide just means a series of amino acids below 40 amino acids. And that does not imply a good thing or a bad thing. And as I've said many times, like pharma has always tended to look at peptides with disdain because they don't have pharmaceutical properties that are, advantageous. Things like Ozempic, retatrutide, and tirzepatide and dulaglutide, all these drugs were heavily modified because the just giving a naked peptide doesn't really do much. Interestingly, tesamorelin is also modified. So like peptides are like pharma people roll their eyes quite a bit at peptides because they're a bit of a liability with how they work. You want a drug that takes many hours of half-life and things like that, and peptides just don't do that unless you modify them heavily. So even something like Ozempic, if you want to be a grammar Nazi about it, if you will, like it's technically not a pure peptide, right? They took it and Frankenfied it into like this weird Frankenstein like peptide plus a bunch of other stuff, and the core of it is of course a peptide, but it's also in a lot of ways this like Frankenpeptide. So there used to be things called peptibodies, which Amgen sort of pioneered, but Eli Lilly took the GLP and they put Fc region on it, which is the antibody fragment constant region, and that gave it this really long half-life. And that drug was called Trulicity, which was Eli Lilly's GLP before Mounjaro. So to me, the word peptide comes with a lot of it's funny to see it blow up because I've been talking about peptides for 25 years, studying medicine, and it's not supposed to have that much connotation or weight other than some kind of molecule that's amino acid based and probably less than around 40 amino acids. That's the only thing peptide should mean to anybody. But to a lot of other people, it's just like you just said, like it's this huge class of different medicines, some of which have zero clinical impact, and some of which are like well-known biopharmaceutical, drugs invented by drug companies that, people take either, under the table or whatever. So, like obviously, if a drug has been FDA approved, we know it works. And if you're taking it as a pirated version, or like a different country approved it, or it's a research chemical, like you're probably going to get the same impact. But if you're taking a drug just because it's a peptide, does not mean it has any beneficial effect whatsoever, right? I can give you a random series of amino acid sequences that correspond to your name. There's 20 amino acids, and they're all like letters of the alphabet. So, it's a, it wouldn't be hard to sort of give you your own personalized peptide, but it wouldn't do anything just because it has, your initials. The amino acids are supposed to bind to some kind of receptor and do something. But again, peptides have such terrible liability of short half-life that they're something pharma hates to use and only uses as a last resort. But aspartic acid is abbreviated D. So, you can get, you can start with aspartic acid, and then there is no O amino acid, so you have to leave that out. But M is methionine, and as we spell out your name, do you think this molecule will work? And are you tempted to go inject it? I think you would say, Martin, this is silly. Why would I do that? And I think that it's just as silly to take BPC. You can go look at the 20 amino acids and design whatever peptide you want. Just mix and match them. And, I used to do this with making these, they're called fusion proteins, where you would use glycine, which is the smallest amino acid. And it's, I think, the only amino acid with free bond rotation. So you'd use glycine, I use GGS, glycine serine, as a spacer to combine different proteins. And we call those fusion proteins or Franken proteins. And the spacers would be really interesting to design. Now that's sort of somewhat intelligent design of a protein. But if you want to just put them together, they're like jigsaw pieces. There's 20 different amino acids. You just, like magnets on a fridge or like Legos, you just connect them, and is that a drug? I don't know. Is that a drug? I don't know. The way you're supposed to do it is these are chemical building blocks that allow us to probe other proteins. So like GHRH binds to a receptor, right? Tesamorelin binds to a specific receptor. It activates growth hormone. Growth hormone gets released. It doesn't bind it by accident. It was specifically that combination of amino acids results in an electrostatic field that will activate that receptor. And other drugs might as well, but other drugs might repel it, and you just don't know until you experiment very carefully. And those experiments are hard to do. As I talked about earlier, they're prone to fraud, where people want to embellish their work and seem important and get more grant funding and things like that. And anyway, I've been talking a lot, so if anybody wants to add something, now's a good time.
Okay, putting your investor hat on, I'm curious, do you see any world where there's demand destruction? Like, it feels like this is a full-blown, pandemonium when it comes to these, what's the term you use? Cosmo pharmaceuticals or something? Like, is there something that would stop this wave? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, regulation, people getting sick, adulterated. Obviously, I think most of the people making this stuff are making it correctly and intelligently, but like at some point, is there some E. coli or some like contaminant that shows up and somebody stupidly injects themselves with it and kills themselves, and there's 10 or 15 people like that's gonna happen almost as a guarantee, just because it's the nature of this stuff, and it even happens in pharma. So it's definitely gonna happen in this unregulated research chemical world. And so, it's that type of thing and that story of like, 10 people died because of this, peptide wave, that might get people to say, okay, maybe this isn't a good idea. It could be something like, for example, GLP pills are coming out, or for Logripron from Eli Lilly is a GLP that has not peptide. It's a GLP receptor agonist that does not have any amino acids in it. It's a small molecule, which is the trad pharma way of doing things, because that pill is very cheap to make. Amino acids can kind of be a pain in the ass to synthesize over a certain amount, and it has a really good half-life, and it's going to be super cheap to make. So when that drug comes out, it'll follow retatrutide by probably about a year or so, or maybe be around the same time, I'm not sure. That drug will also be very popular, and when these drugs go generic, which Ozempic is almost generic, you can get FDA-approved Ozempic for maybe just a handful of dollars, which is going to be really great. Like, why would you want to mess around with something that, is not FDA approved? Now, again, prescriptions there's still a big barrier to going to the doctor and getting a prescription and getting it refilled. The doctors want to get the visit money. So unless you can get these, can get a doctor who's going to write you the script, and you're going to keep seeing him, so he gets paid a couple $100 a visit and to refill your prescription, otherwise he'll stop refilling it and you got to go find another doctor. That kind of racket is going to continue forever. And I think people are pissed off about that too. And I think that kind of thing, could start to change, where it's like, look, why do I need to see this doctor sit in the waiting room for him to look me up and down for 3 seconds and say, all right, here you go, here's another prescription. And I'm paying $300 or $400. My insurance company's paying somebody who's paying somebody who's paying somebody. Everyone's taking this little piece for all this nonsense. And I think that kind of thing is going to change regardless, because people are sick of it. At the same time, a doctor says, look, you're in the care of me as a physician, and I need to be able to look you in the eye and see that you're okay to give you this prescription, and I'll make sure that you're healthy. And for some of us, all we're really trying to say is, dude, it's not that serious, or bro, it's not that serious. Like, let me just give me the fucking drugs, put the drugs in the bag, and let me do my thing. And I think for a lot of us younger people, that is true, and that's what we want, and we want them to fuck off and just give me my prescriptions, and I don't want to see you every week. I know you want to see me every week because you get paid fucking thousands of dollars an hour, but I'm not trying to do all that. And I think that is great, except when it isn't. And the doctor patient trust relationship is a hard one to come by, but there's a reason that exists. And I think people want clearly the second tier of medicine that's more relaxed, less high impact. I believe, for example, that statins, antibiotics, and blood pressure drugs should be not just generic, which they are, but not prescription. I think they should be OTC. And these are drugs that are been used by literally 1 billion people in some cases. They're not hard to manage with. They're very, very safe in the case of many of these. And there's no reason, people shouldn't be able to just go get them from the pharmacy counter. They're very cheap, but there is a medical lobby in the world. There is a doctor lobby, and I think it's way worse than the pharma lobby. And
so do you have any takes on HIMSS then, what they're doing with telehealth or the stock, or curious on your hot takes there?
Yeah, they're obviously very, revolutionary company that's going to cause some anarchy, because the idea that instead of the doctor looking you up and down, patting you on the back, listening to the crackles, and making sure that you're okay, which the doctor feels responsible for, right? And your family might sue him if you weren't okay and he said you're okay. So there's a reason that he feels responsible, as he should, or she should. So that versus, a 20-second telehealth, oh yeah, sure, no problem, here you go. It's a different kind of medicine. But again, it's a legitimate product that some people want. And should somebody who's just had a stroke see a telehealth doc like that? No, absolutely not. But should somebody who just wants their birth control pill refilled, that seems a pretty low impact thing that should just be available. And same thing with an SSRI or something like that, and I don't see too many people who want to go give themselves lots of SSRIs, but it would make medicine a lot better if people can just go refill these low impact medicines with AI, for example, which I believe Utah is piloting this. But instead of having to go see Dr. Smith,
65-year-old guy who's making millions of dollars, just glancing at me for 3 seconds. AI just says, okay, you're feeling well, I'm refilling your prescription for this SSRI or that PPI drug. I mean, PPIs are insane. They did make those OTC after a while, but heartburn drugs are the lowest impact medicine you can think of, and they for a long time were still refused to make them OTC. So here's your statin, here's your this, here's your that, because guess what happens when you don't do that and you have doctors that have to prescribe first? You lose patients. And my father died of cardiovascular disease a few years ago, and if he was able to get his prescriptions without the doctor experience, which you might need a doctor who speaks your language. You might be hard on money. You might want to refill your medicines, but that doctor visit, well, he's 2 months away. In small towns, sometimes doctors are booked for appointments two months away, and it could be several hours of a drive. That's expensive, and all of a sudden I'm not getting my refill because of all these other reasons. I mean, I won't go wait on the line on Starbucks, for 3 seconds, let alone, going to get my prescription for a key medicine I need. So I know people are going without their medicines for this reason. So I think that there's a lot of problems with the system we have, but I think jabbing some shit in your arm, is not the answer. And that's what I mostly want to talk about. So anybody else?
Yeah, Martin, I appreciate you doing this. I wanted to ask more in regards to, I have a friend that's convinced about these nootropic drugs, right?
Yeah.
Cerebrolizin developed by the Russians, you have Pineolon, you have Dihexa, you have all these things. But then when you look at least from what I've seen, right, all of the research around, synaptogenesis and neurogenesis
Yeah.
is that the brain is very, very efficient at
Yes.
pruning, excess synaptic connections, or even if you increase BDNF by whatever percentage these drugs claim they do, it won't do shit,
I
right?
know
So
this field
what do
very
you think
well.
about that?
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who was born, as a, intellectually gifted, quote unquote, person or prodigy or whatever, I've thought about the nature of intelligence in medicine quite often. There's a funny paper on this actually that's really, really, really great. And let me see if I can find it while we speak. But it's basically, they gave, I think, nicotine, caffeine, and modafinil to chess players. And chess, is a, here it is. It's methylphenidate, which is Concerta, which is used for ADHD, modafinil, which is also used for ADHD, and caffeine. So it's called methylphenidate, modafinil, and caffeine for cognitive enhancement in chess, a double-blind randomized control trial. This thing showed that none of these drugs do shit. And you could, chess is amazing because you have this really perfect ability to tell whether you've played better or not. You can get ELO, ELO ratings with just a 5-point ELO improvement, 10-point ELO improvement. If you're like me, I'll take any ELO improvement I can get. And, they did this really careful study, and they showed that there was no impact on any of these drugs on this very cognitive thing. So I think there is this homeostatic mechanism that stops you from being able to dial up your intelligence. I think people think that nicotine, is something that is exempt from this. And I studied these drugs really carefully. In fact, I owned, for the longest time, the first ever nicotinic drug called mecamylamine, which is, very interesting little molecule. But Vecamil was made by Pfizer for smoking cessation. And then there were a bunch of different drugs that were trying to use for cognitive impairment and schizophrenia, which is a real illness. But ADHD is also another one of these illnesses that's sort of an intelligence surrogate. So in CIS, cognitive impairment and schizophrenia, you basically have an IQ deficit. What happens and why doesn't matter. In ADHD, you also sort of have an IQ deficit in sort of a different way. So in essence, the people wanted to see if these nicotinics would actually improve IQ. And the different diseases that us pharma guys put them through is still, at the end of the day, we're trying to just get these people to be smarter, whether it's because they need to focus more or because there's something clouding their brain, whatever it is. And none of these drugs worked. In fact, what was funny is that one company was called Targacept, And I shorted Targacept, and Targacept has since changed its name and reverse merged and disappeared. But Targacept, was actually a spin out of RJR. RJR was RJ Reynolds, the tobacco company. So RJ Reynolds didn't want to be a tobacco company forever. They wanted to be a health company too. Why not, right? They wanted to shed their terrible reputation and do something beneficial. So they made all these nicotinic-like drugs and said, we know nicotine, so let's make these and try to make something that's good for people. And they did that, and they still failed. So it's very hard to change your IQ. It's very hard to get smarter. It's very hard to change your intelligence. And I think that there are ways to sort of mask it. Learning lots of vocabulary, if you can, is one such way. But some people argue that is a form of intelligence, regardless. In any event, if you ever find an actual IQ improving drug, let me know immediately. But I think that unfortunately it doesn't exist. Interesting last thing on nicotine is that they did find these very subclinical changes for ADHD and nicotine, but they normalized so fast, and they got this tachyphylactic sort of situation where it would take more drug to maintain the response. Tachyphylaxis is a weird word. It's only ever seen in pharma, but it's just this idea that you get sensitized to medicine. And some medicines have deep tachyphylaxis, others have none whatsoever. And everyone's always wanted to find that drug that will improve their IQ. But we've all know after drinking some coffee that maybe we feel more alert, but are we really actually smarter and doing things more efficiently? Sometimes I feel like if I drink a bunch of coffee and I sit down to work, I get nothing done. And I'm just spinning my wheels, but I'm really pepped up and I'm doing something really inefficient or stupid. And sometimes if I'm too sleepy, I can't do anything either. But I don't think that the middle is some benefit. It's a funny thing. Read the study I talked about on the caffeine for chess, and it's very eye-opening that whether or not you're half asleep or pepped up on caffeine, your chess performance is probably the same. And I bet you there's a scientific way to study that more carefully, but not too many people are interested in paying to do this trial.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I've always kind of conceptualized it, or the way that I've heard it conceptualized when it came to stimulants, right, is that they can kind of very slightly, like you mentioned, in a subclinical way, short-term optimize your existing brain structure, right? But then, your body gets used to it too quickly for it to have any, lasting or measurable effect. But the idea with these, these neurogenesis and synaptogenic drugs is that they would help you grow more, right? Which is obviously a very, the claim is dubious just at face value, because I could take DMT every day at sub-grade 3 doses and say, oh, my neuroplasticity is really high,
one of the diseases,
right? But that's not going to do anything.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in with a quick comment, if I could. The study that you were referring to, Martin, hey, by the way, it did show that no effect of caffeine, but both methylphenidate and modafinil showed that it increased reflection time.
Did you check the primary endpoint?
The primary endpoint?
Yeah.
What are you referring to?
The primary endpoint of the trial.
Yeah, it didn't improve performance for timed games, but it did improve performance for games that allowed you to increase reflection time.
But
so
you understand the primary endpoint is what's important.
Yeah, you're saying because that wasn't the one that they were originally targeting, and so it could have just had,
if you let me change the Duke game from the score at the end of the game to the score 5, what was it? Did you see that play? It was 10 seconds, right? 12.
Well, no, but it was different subsets of games.
Different. It's different in my case too.
Well, yes, I think I get what you're saying, but I think if they reran the study, what they kind of were seeming. What?
They should rerun it. I mean,
they should rerun it. But what it seems to show is that
would have been, and then they could have.
Yes, but what we know about what these drugs do is they can help increase focus and increase reflection time, and that's what they should have done in retrospect.
I hate when I spend $100 million on a clinical trial and fails, and it tells me what I should have done, and then I do it again and it failed again. There's a funny example of this. I made $20 million shorting the stock called Vital Therapies, and it was a funny little device for dialysis of the liver instead of dialysis of the kidney. It was this really neat little device that said, well, if I can do dialysis on your kidney, why not do it on my liver? And they put liver cells in this box, and they said, take your blood and put it in the box, and take the blood coming out of the box and put it back into you, and it'll detoxify the stuff, right? And I looked into the box, and I said, this thing doesn't work. And they did a study, and they said, well, patients with this score, did really well in the box, and patients below this score did really poorly. And they said, let's just do the trial again with the patients above this score. And of course it failed. But they found another thing where they said, well, if the patients had this, like just patients who have alcoholic liver disease did really well, patients with non-alcoholic didn't. So obviously we have to go do the alcoholics. They did a third study that also failed. And at no point did they say, this thing just doesn't fucking do anything. So I think you can chase a lot of this data back and forth, but like this thing just, whenever a primary endpoint fails, to me, that's it. If you want to hypothesis generate, you can hypothesis generate and do a new study. But this is why this was published in Neuropsychopharmacology, and if they did it again and it worked, it would get published in New England Journal of Medicine. And everyone wants a cognitive booster. It's just, it doesn't exist. my eyes.
So what do you think about like fish oil and choline? Because we know if you have a lack of choline, you're basically retarded. So wouldn't supplementing choline improve intelligence?
Well, I mean, if you're looking at deficits, and I want to talk about synaptogenesis real quick because it's interesting. But yeah, if you're going to fix deficits, you restore to a normal level, but I don't think you become super intelligent or something. As long as I don't hit myself in the head with a hammer every day, I'll improve my intelligence by not reducing it, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to get extra intelligent by not doing that. So I want to talk about synaptogenesis and stuff like that. So one of the first diseases I really wanted to go after was Fragile X, and Fragile X is the largest form of monogenic autism, and the gene is called FMRP, which stands for Fragile X mental retardation protein, and nobody really knows what FMRP does, and it has this pleiotropic effect. It's this huge protein that might have 30, 40, 50, 100 binding partners. Some people think it's involved in RNA and it serves as like a transcription factor or some special gene repressor, or some other multivariate thing. What's really bizarre though is if you have a mutation in Fragile X mental retardation protein, you get Fragile X syndrome. And Fragile X patients have around a 20 IQ. It's probably the lowest sort of known sort of pathogenic syndromic intellectual disability. And it sort of makes you wonder if like the keys to intelligence really sitting in this one protein. And so what does this protein do? Well, we have a hard time like pinpointing it 100%, but we can kind of, beat around the bush with these indirect studies. But it's a very fascinating illness if you look at it. And it is a prototypical autism, very severe autism. Females have something called Rett syndrome. So Fragile X, of course, being on the X chromosome is males only. But females have something called Rett syndrome, which is the MECP2 protein, which was actually quite similar to FMRP. So if you look at those and you try to think about all the things that they do, and then you pivot over to some other syndromic intellectual disabilities, there's a protein called SHANK, or SHANK3, like a prison shank. And there's even a suite of diseases now referred to as Shankopathies. But if you look at SHANK, it's really got this incredibly more specific role in
synapse formation. And there's this whole like synaptopathy, categorization now as we start to understand this a little bit better. And it's basically impossible to piece together what the hell's going on in there. Nobody knows. The brain is such an inscrutable mess that, the temptation is to think that, well, one protein is going to fix it all. But the one protein that does cause these like deep problems seems to be like this master protein that does like interact with like 200 different proteins. So the odds that we're going to find a medicine that just like boosts us quite a bit are low, for the simple reason that medicines, unfortunately, have to do one thing at a time. Think about what a medicine is. It's a series of atoms connected to each other. That series of atoms has some electrical profile where it might form a hydrogen bond here or there, or pi stack here or there, or whatever. And what's it going to do that to? Well, some human protein or some human chemical. And it can only really do one of those at a time. It's not going to do part of one in one part of the molecule and part of one in the other. And even if you got that, you're really now down to only being able to interact with two different molecules. To do this like intelligence thing, you're talking about a concert, a symphony of different molecules all doing things together. But we don't study symphonies of drugs. We study drugs one at a time, which is a huge liability, but we know no better way. So imagine whatever Fragile X is doing, that there are 4 proteins that matter to Fragile X. And if you boosted those 4, you could have unlimited intelligence. Well, the problem is we would never stumble upon this, because if drug 1 was given to somebody and they had no intelligence improvement, and somebody said, no, it's going to work. I'm just going to give drugs 1 and 2 together. And they do a placebo-controlled study, still doesn't work. And then somebody says, I'll do 3 of these together. And they're researching this sequentially. They haven't discovered the 4th one yet. And they give 3 drugs to somebody and a placebo to somebody else, thousands of participants, still no signal. They would have to try to find, 4, all 4, to control all of the symphony that's going on. And for a long time, people thought this would be weight loss too. Because with weight loss, there's this massive number of molecules and proteins that have been involved to keep you eating. Why? Well, evolutionarily, you're not going to die if you're eating. So there's neuropeptide Y, ghrelin, leptin. I mean, there's a amazing assortment of molecules that keep you hungry and keep you eating, because it's better for you than starving. And a lot of people in the obesity therapeutics world thought that, well, every time you try to shut one of these down, the other guys start speaking up a little bit more and saying, feed me, don't starve. And they found a way with GLP to sort of cut off all the bullshit and have this tremendous weight loss through this incretin. And really impressive to do so. You really beat biology's gates that it's kept up. And intelligence, it may seem as somewhat similar, but never bet against the ingenuity of people to figure out the way around it, right? And there's different ideas, like our brain runs on electricity, so maybe you can pump more electricity into the brain and that'll work. And that's called TDCS, I think, transcranial direct current stimulation. And that's had some interesting impacts. And this is stuff I'm interested in to some extent for the same reason people are interested in peptides, which is, what is the limit of human knowledge or human intelligence? What does that look like? Wouldn't it be cool to be Einstein for a day? The same way some people might say, well, I can run a mile in 6 minutes. Wouldn't it be cool to run a mile in 5 minutes? Of course it would be. Wouldn't it be cool? I always play basketball. Wouldn't it be cool to be able to jump just a couple inches higher? I'd really be able to mog everybody in the court. And these questions are something that, like, we all want answers to in some ways, but I also feel like, there's something as too much curiosity, and there's also something as just being like a convenient idiot, I guess, like where you're believing all this stuff and you're like, oh yeah, this definitely works or whatever. And I think the rigor is still really important, but to some people the stakes aren't that high, where it's like, look, I don't know if this thing's going to help my shoulder injury, this BPC 157. It's not. But if you're like, look, what's going to go wrong? I've had this terrible shoulder pain for 3 years after I, fell or something. Maybe this thing will work. And, it's to me no different from saying, maybe if I jump out of the window, I'll sprout wings and start to fly away. It's not really the right question to ask. But, I also understand that there is not a tremendous risk to giving it a shot. And again, this is framing it in a way where it makes it sound reasonable. So I don't like this, but it's each person's risk reward to decide. But it really is a stupid way to look at it, because you're basically saying, will this random concoction of amino acids solve my problem? And, like I said, take the amino acid chart and put your name or put your favorite word, type out the word, whatever, Sydney Sweeney, S is serine, by the way, for amino acids. So, maybe that drug will save you. Like, there's not a lot of logic to just, trying random medicines.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I always thought about this whole neuroplasticity, because like you, like this whole intelligence thing is extremely interesting to me, right? Because it's, what you can do cosmetically to your body has kind of been solved
Because
mostly with
we're all
steroids, right?
dumbasses that want to be smarter than we actually are.
Right, but like the idea with the neuroplasticity thing, right, is that the other crux that I see with it is that, like I said, right, I can take DMT daily, and I'll open up, a very neuroplastic window in my brain, but the issue is that plausibly
I'm not even sure that's
also
true. Like, the word neuroplastic is doing a lot of work here that it's not easy to even define it, right? But go on.
right. But like the idea with that is that, if you were somehow theoretically able to rewire your brain, right, you would also then encode all of your bad habits stronger, right? If you spend time on your phone, or if you use certain stimulants, right, that act on certain pathways in the brain. But it's that idea that, we have like cerebrolizin, right, was Russian, or at least all that I know about it is that Russia developed it to treat stroke and Alzheimer's and help heal traumatic brain injuries. How do those meds affect people with healthy brains? Do they just not work, or is there like a way, is there a reason that they just don't work in people with healthy brains?
Yeah, it's a good question. There have been other drugs like this. Valproate is a really good one. So Valproate, talk about like biohacking and stuff like that. People have used Valproate for its epigenetic, possible, activity. So Valproate is just, I'm sure you guys may know, valproic acid or Depakote. It's an old Abbott Labs drug. It's a GABA mimetic. It's used for a couple different things, but it's mostly used for bipolar. But what's been discovered is like it can sort of do a bunch of weird stuff. And one of the things that it can do is it and again, I hate to say this because I'm gonna sound like a peptide person. I want to be really careful about making claims, but there have been like a bunch of different weird findings that valproate or valproic acid seems to open up like some of the things that maybe have been closed. So the paper I'm thinking about, you want to look it up, it's called Valproate Reopens Critical Period Learning of Absolute Pitch. And this, just like the caffeine chest paper, is not a very good paper, but it was published in Frontiers, Cyst Neuroscience, Frontier Cyst, let me see, what is that, Systematic? Frontiers in Systems Neuroscience. Valproate reopens critical period learning of absolute pitch. So what they found is that you could learn perfect pitch after taking valproate, which is kind of fucking crazy, right? Most people get perfect pitch when they're kids. They sing and they get this perfect pitch, and it's like 1% of people, if that. As a famously tone deaf singer, I always wanted perfect pitch, and anytime I could sing okay is after deep amounts of practice. And other than and if I don't keep practicing, I lose it, and I have to practice singing forever to just be okay. And then there's people that they just open their mouth and they're Pavarotti, right? And you're just like, damn, how'd you do that? And they don't know. And so anyway, they gave this drug to people and found that it had this remarkable impact. And then there's other experiences like this with valproate, and some people think that it opens up this epigenetic window that allows you to remove these epigenetic markers and find a way to like rewrite some of that. Now, I think it's probably bullshit, but you know, there have been a lot of work done on, you know, whether or not you can change epigenetics in humans. So epigenetics are these markers that basically say, turn this gene off or turn this gene on. And there was a funny thing about SSRIs that they don't work through serotonin, which is very funny, and I think true. And they probably work through epigenetics instead, because if they work through serotonin, they should work right away. But SSRIs famously take weeks and weeks to work. And, you know, ketamine works instantly. So SSRIs are probably not working through a serotonin mechanism because the serotonin impact is immediate. But there probably is this, you know, epigenetic situation happening. Most people know of histone acetylation and methylation as the main epigenetic systems, but there's actually, you know, tons of ways to modify DNA. There's serotonylation, believe it or not, is an emerging one. So proteins and DNA. So you can serotonylate a protein, and then, you know, that has a change in its, you know, in what it does. And obviously glycosylation of proteins is another way to do this. So, you know, there are some mysteries that we still don't know, and it would not. That's why it's not impossible for some of this stuff to happen. The strange shit happens in medicine. Thalidomide, which was thought to be this terrible, useless drug, turns out to be a cure for multiple myeloma, and nobody could figure out how or why. There's a famous investor who basically went crazy and went down in flames, you know, arguing that this thing was a fraud, and it became one of the most important medicines ever. You know, these people were dying of multiple myeloma, and thalidomide was saving them. And it was found that it works this unbelievably bizarre way that was totally unintended, where it grabs one protein with one hand and takes it to the garbage collector, or the ubiquitination system, which is sort of the garbage collector system of the cell with the lysosome. And it basically says, hey, you guys should meet. You should take this protein and degrade it. And that, you know, was totally unintentional. Could you imagine making intentionally a drug that on the left side of the molecule binds some molecule in the body, and on the right side of the molecule binds the garbage system, and sort of forces the garbage system to collect this drug? It's a miracle, amazing engineering, totally accidental, totally unintended. And they took them 50 years to figure out this is how it was happening. So we never say never in medicine, but that was such an unlikely story. And it's now called Protax. But it was like nobody would have guessed that that's how thalidomide was working. Some people thought it was working through VEGF. Some people thought it was working through TNF. They were just like random molecules you'd throw around because you couldn't explain it. And it was actually working through this really elaborate way, and they finally discovered it 40 or 50 years later, and now they're fully exploiting that technique. But you know, the likelihood that just random stuff works, and I would count BPC as random stuff, is pretty much close to zero. Now, there's so many attempts in medicine that occasionally you get a story like thalidomide or Viagra, which is less special, but you know, was a drug that was meant to work on vasculature. And it turns out that the better vasculature it works on is the one related to, you know, just, I guess, blood flow of certain organs. So that vasculature was valuable to Pfizer, but its initial attempt of doing general cardiovascular tone was not so helpful. And so they pivoted to a more specific cardiovascular tone, and that did work. And so that's a big difference between, this BPC stuff was designed by nobody special and they didn't have any idea what it would do, they still can't explain it, and all of a sudden it works. I think you either need a miracle clinical trial experience or some scientific explanation, ideally both, to have a medicine, and here there's neither. So again, you know, to me, this is more about, you know, shit like BPC not working than, you know, all these interesting excursions we've been on about medicine. You know, I know everything about medicine. And it's fun to talk about this stuff. But it informs the opinion of the random peptide stories. Those are, just kind of like, to me, they really take the great stories of pharmaceuticals and almost like smear them. They're Mona Lisa molecules, and this is pornography.
So I apologize. I know I've taken up a lot of your time, so I just have one more question. But this is kind of more big picture, like you were talking about earlier with Frank. But when you talk about, this is something that just interested me for a while, right? This idea that you have primarily women that take SSRIs for a very long time, and like you mentioned, right, how they can work epigenetically. Do you think that then also would impact receptor sensitivity, or just it would impact the epigenetics of their children, and then make them more prone to having adverse mental health conditions?
Yeah. I mean, I by the way, contest that it's all women who take SSRIs, but in any event, it's probably quite a bit higher, but it's, not predominantly, women, I don't think, in terms of like that disproportional. But in any event, yeah, I mean, this is a major question. Trauma tends to sort of persist down family lines, and that's thought to be epigenetic. So the more like repressors you get on your genome for certain proteins, I do think that probably gets passed down. Now, serotonin is a tricky one. Maybe. I think there is a big difference between gametes and non-gametes and, somatic cells. And I don't know how much these drugs modify your gametic cells. So it's hard to say, but I think, I could believe it. I mean, I think it'd be really interesting to do the study. There are some people that think that autism is kind of caused by this dynamic, including, immunology, where a Stanford group, I believe, put out an amazing paper that showed that there's a maternal fetal immune response to certain brain proteins that is correlated with autism. And if you're not expressing some of those proteins, you actually sort of saving yourself from the immune system in some ways. So there's a lot of theories you can think about and spin around, but that's the problem with medicine, is like there's only one way to prove it. And oftentimes it's something that you can't do. Like, if I knock out this protein in your brain to make you really dumb, is that something that's ethical? Of course not. If I try to stop, the immune response of a baby and mother to a brain protein, well, that sounds pretty dangerous too. I'm not gonna do that. So you only have so many ways to like indirectly test some of these things. And I feel like, there's everything else is just sort of guessing. And that's why there's 40 million PubMed articles. There's maybe 40,000 that are worth reading. And you don't know which are which. Nikki.
Yo, thank you, bro. I really wanted to ask you, because I'm not going to do too much deep research on it. It's not my subject area of expertise, but I saw you were doing a space on it. And like, I don't know, I've been locked in for a few years. I've seen you for a while. This is just something you're so knowledgeable about. I really wanted to know what you think about like modafinil and what the capacity would be for kind of ordinary people to take these peptides that are like actually helpful for something beyond some like typical shallow purpose, like being tan, for like cognitive peptides, stuff like that. What's your sense on that? I'm sorry
Yeah.
if you covered it
No,
already.
it's fine. So obviously these aren't peptides. The modafinil is a small molecule. There are no cognitive peptides, mostly because peptides won't cross the blood-brain barrier. So anybody telling you they have a cognitive peptide is immediately lying to you, because these larger amino acid sequences, first, they're so flimsy, they're gone within minutes, and then two, they're definitely not crossing the BBB for a number of reasons. So, there are no real brain peptides, so to speak, that will go from the periphery to the brain. So modafinil is a small molecule, been around a while, really funny story in history there too. I was involved a little bit with this company because they were called Cephalon, they were publicly traded, and modafinil was this like big seller, and it was growing very rapidly, and you can kind of buy the stock and get some exposure to like something growing really quickly. Now the problem was they
they had this really old patent. Modafinil was discovered by some French company called Lefon a long time ago, and Cephalon was the American company that just had a license to it. And they were selling the crap out of it, even though their label was this like really skinny, weird label for, I forgot what the original modafinil label actually, but it was like something really retarded and like, let me see if I can find it while we talk. But it was like this really silly disease, and then everyone was sort of getting, you know, taking the drug for obviously other reasons. And so, yeah, the first, you know, try to see what the first FDA approval for it was, but it was something that eventually, you know, more and more people realized that it was like, you know, kind of a drug that did more things than they thought. So sleep, shift work sleep disorder was one of them, but I think it was just, we used to call it excessive daytime sleepiness. So I think maybe associated with narcolepsy, maybe some other things. But when our modafinil came in, that was just our isomer. And so Cephalon was one of these companies that had to do this, what we called the switch. And the switch was just take the isomer, get it FDA approved, and move all the patients off of what was soon about to be the really cheap racemic mixture and move it to, you know, the specific isomer that, you know, was purified. And there was a whole company that their whole business model was to do this called Sepracor, and they literally were separating the isomers. So Cephalon had this problem where the generic, the mixture would go generic, but the pure armodafinil is a quote-unquote new drug, right? And so they had to do this. It like most of these things, it sort of worked, sort of didn't. But they got armodafinil, and then, you know, when armodafinil went generic, that was really it. So Cephalon had to like constantly juggle between all these drugs. In any event, modafinil had this really weird efficacy because nobody could figure out what the hell it was. You know, how does it work? Nobody knows to this day. And in general, there's sort of like two theories on it, that it's just a dopamine drug, just like the ADHD drugs. And it just like simply, you know, does the same thing that, you know, Adderall does, etc. Or that it works in this really crazy way we just don't know. And, you know, those are the two sort of theories. But what's interesting here is that while it promotes like this hypervigilance, I'm not sure it promotes this increase in intellect. And I have some people, there are friends that swear by it, but I feel like it's very hard to like get away from the benefits of sleep. And I think that it's very dangerous to take this drug and think you don't need to sleep. And then the other thing is, again, like people who are really smart taking this drug, you know, are not getting smarter. They're just already there. And, you know, there's not much that's going to change that. And there's a selection bias there, because most of the people taking a drug like this for some intellectual benefit, they're probably already a little, you know, selected for on a distribution basis than somebody who isn't. And you'd have truck drivers taking it and people like that needed to be on a schedule where they were awake. And, you know, that was something that made sense medicinally for a very small number of people, but it ended up being used by tons of people, being abused. And Cephalon for a long time was thought to be promoting it inappropriately, promoting it off-label, so to speak, for any of your patients who need to stay awake for anything. Just give them modafinil; they'll be good. And now it's you know, it's illegal to do that, but drug sales reps are not known to necessarily care. So it was a really wild chapter for medicine because of that mechanistic ambiguity of like, is this thing a dopamine transport inhibitor? What is it doing exactly? Is it just meth? Because the molecule had no, you know, real structural similarity to any of the amphetamines. So, you know, how could it be doing what it's doing? And I think that, you know, I'm sure science has you know, basically gotten around to figuring out sort of how it works. And I think it's generally accepted to work largely the same way as amphetamines, but, you know, it's clearly not an amphetamine given its structure. It's very bizarre
sort of simple structure. That it's not really clear, what it's doing from its structure. That's for sure. But
that is so cool to hear your thoughts on. Do you agree with this statement that there are no free lunches in nature, just in regard to like stacks that people could be taking to improve? This question is born out of peak interest into whether or not is anything that like kind of everybody should be taking if only they knew it existed, or at least are you optimistic on the front of that being the case at some point?
I'm very bearish on that idea. I think that,
Sorry, you said bearish.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think that. I don't think that there's, any of these drugs are, as I said, somewhat earlier, like taking medicine to me is about, helping, an illness you have, not, trying to like improve a situation where you're already somewhat optimal. And I think like, steroids for your mind or other things like that. I mean, it's a neat idea, but, in general, most of our biology operates pretty optimally. And, to stress it in a way that, wasn't meant to work is probably, pretty dangerous to begin with. So I would let nature take its course. I mean, I think, trying to interrupt these natural processes is a bit dangerous. Hamilton, holistic.
Hey, Martin. I'm just curious about what you think about Prenuvo, like the MRI scans for diagnosing or preventing medicine or preventing like disease in the future.
Yeah, I mean, MRIs are, I think there is a huge benefit to things like more like digital biopsy or liquid biopsy. So things like the Grail and things like Prenuvo are good too. There's tons of preventative healthcare that we can do to avoid needing pharmaceuticals. And at the same time, we have people mostly in this call asking about these like very voluntary, kind of almost ridiculous ideas like, can I get 5 IQ points if I take this thing from China? Can I, heal my injury, with BPC 157, which we spent hours talking about? All these things are everyone has a different opinion of what medicine looks like. And, even though I'm the pharma bro, I think everyone should have the goal of not taking any medicine if possible. And again, medicine implies immediately that, there's something wrong. Whereas for a lot of people, that's not where they're at. They want some improvement or enhancement. And I feel like, again, what the gentleman said earlier, I mean, no free lunch does apply in some ways. Even HGH, has side effects and issues with it. Some are pretty well known. The gonadal suppression is well understood there. So, there's I'm sure there's some free lunch somewhere. But it's something where I'm just sort of skeptical. I also just had the flu, so I'm flu-brained at the moment. So if I don't answer your question, I'm gonna blame the flu a little bit. Anybody else? Just jump in.
Yeah, I had a general question. I do appreciate the way you are approaching the topic, because most people are not at all careful, extremely dogmatic. So I appreciate that just in general. But so my understanding, and I could be wrong here, but with everything from peptides to every hormone, even HGH, like you just mentioned, even if they call it organic, no matter what they want to call it, the nature of the process of which they derive these chemicals are these allegedly, bioidentical substances from the body. They always involve chemical agents or reagents. Sometimes they're shooting like electromagnetic beams at it, drying agents, rehydrating agents. And it's not like they just reach their scientific hands into the human body and pull it out. Now, is this always the case that they are always like adding additional steps that make it unclear as if these substances are even in the body, the living body, in the same way that they say? Or am I perhaps confused about this?
I mean, I understand what you're saying. In pharma, you seldom are ever giving the perfect synthetic product without some adulterating like circumstance. The only question is, can you identify it, minimize it, etc.? And you can get pretty close. I mean, I think that you probably are getting so close in some cases that it'd be harder to beat that in nature. These are really in some cases extremely well made. But you're not wrong that, even for something, let's say like insulin or other biologically made drugs, you're counting on some random cell line to make you this drug. And that means that when you purify the drug from the cell line, all the filters in the world, you're still gonna probably get some random shit in there. And, filters are pretty good. So you can say, my molecule is 653 molecular weight. I need everything below 640, and everything above 700, the hell out of here. And that filter works no different from your spaghetti strainer, right?
Yeah.
But
And
there's still subtleties to that maybe something's wrong with the filter. Maybe some things get through the filter that you don't think they do.
well, what if there's like, a perfect filter? Let's just do the ideal situation. The thing that sort of worries me, which is why I'm happy to hear you speak in the way you're speaking, is that, just because there is an effect does not like does not mandate that there's not some sort of hidden effect that maybe you're denying psychologically, maybe a downstream effect that is unknown thus far. So you can have the appearance of even a good effect that really, in the short to long term, that is extremely detrimental. And this is not often spoken of by really anybody, frankly.
Well, there's structure and then there's function. I think structure, is something science can get its head around. Function is something is a more experiential, thing where we just get it empirically from data, and we do our best to dial in the structure just perfect, and then we roll the dice and we see what the hell is going to happen function wise. And sometimes you don't know until years later. Sometimes right away. Sometimes it's ambiguous. So I think that that is kind of the dynamic you're talking about. And there's all the best plans of mice and men are often will go awry because there's a lot of daylight between structure where we're try to think we know what's going to happen, and then function. And a really good example of this is the water that was used in Genzyme's recombinant enzyme production changed. There's a really great story to this, and I always butcher it, but basically the city changed the water supply or something like this, and or the water supply of the city was used in one of the vendors, and they didn't know that it changed, and they didn't notify Genzyme. All of a sudden, their drug stopped working, and it's just like a catastrophe because they made really important medicines for very, very sick people, and this little change. I mean, really, water's water, right? That basically caused the collapse of one of the biggest biotech companies in the world. It ended up being acquired by Sanofi in this vulnerable state because of this water problem. And it took them years to figure it out. And it was just a really weird situation with the subtlest, dumbest, one thing changed. And so I do think that, it's sometimes in medicine is really cut and dry. And it's like, look, aspirin to aspirin, this is all the same shit. It doesn't matter. You take gobfuls of it. You can take expired aspirin. It's all the same shit. And then there's that sensitive, fragile drug there that, just changing the water caused this global catastrophe in biotech. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was about 20 years ago. And then the French pounced on our beautiful biotech in Boston, Genzyme. It's one of the greatest companies ever. If you want to learn the Genzyme story, it's an amazing one. It's captured to some extent in this book called Orphan, which is mostly out of print book, but if you can get a copy of it, it's worth the read. Learn some of these great stories about medicine. And the pioneer there is a Dutch guy, Henry Tremere, who passed away, was the first person to care about rare disease drugs and making these drugs for these truly, truly sick people that had no options other than these $1 million drugs that were lifesavers, but also these really weird economic things where like only a couple people had this disease. So
you had to make up for it in the price of the drug, which is something I'm really acquainted with. So in any event, it is a good example of the difference between structure and function.
Yeah, that is I often get accused of like immediately of just trying to be a troll or like, spoil the party with, somewhat subtle questions like these. But just that example you gave with the water supply, people always want to apply to one population things that my understanding is the statistics do not even work under their own paradigm of statistical application. So something like even just the evolutionary nature of our diseases, which we know are there, and the different histories of people's nutrition and stuff like that, they just assume because that's really the only thing we can do is assume when really there could be, that water supply times a trillion. But yeah, I appreciate you handling my questions as you did. Thank you.
Anybody else? Daniel? Somebody else?
Hey, Martin, can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Yeah, I got two of you guys, though, so one of you guys go first.
I think I was first.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Martin, quick question. You mentioned Brian Johnson earlier. It's kind of unrelated, but I'm just curious your thoughts on, do you think it's possible to extend like the human life as far as, way past the normal average to maybe 20, 30, 40 years with all of the things he's doing and with all your experience in medicine? And then separately, do you even think that's even noble given your view on what medicine should be used for?
And by the way, everybody, my friend Anthony is here. Anthony is very, very smart on all this stuff. And if you hear something from him, it's just as good as hearing it from me. And it might give me a little bit of breathing room to eat a candy bar here or something. But I think, and I'm actually super curious what Anthony's take is, I don't think Brian Johnson is doing a single fucking thing for his health that's beneficial. And if anything, it's very likely he is harming himself. But I'm curious what you think, Anthony. Don't want to put you on the spot if you don't want to be on the spot.
I mean, look, I'll always answer a question like this. I mean, look, Brian's a really cool guy. I really try to follow his work. Somewhat anecdotally, like, as I kind of see it come across my feed, I'm super happy to see that he's talking about, this treatment for alopecia today. I think that's really important that someone's putting some light on that particular treatment. But I mean, as far as this longevity stuff goes, I mean, I in general kind of remain a bit unconvinced about any longevity treatments at this time until we see like some really good long-term data. There's a lot of people that are in this space that are trying to come up with some nice new approaches. There's like some dog therapy company, Brian doing what he's doing. I mean, at least I would say this, like, I'm happy that someone's at least putting it to the test. Like, someone's like rigorously testing all this stuff that people have been saying definitely works, on the back of like epidemiological.
But he's not regularly testing shit.
He's doing a lot of lab tests. Like, he's setting stuff off for like, he's measuring a bunch of his biomarkers. He's doing like mass spec analysis on his tests. I mean, like, if he's out of one, right? But like, if you're gonna try to make a claim or try to like do some due diligence on like yourself, at least like he's out here trying to test his own biometrics and like doing like at least N-of-1 studies. I mean, like, just like,
what happened to Anthony?
I'm being converted. No, I mean, look, I like I said, no, I'm not like convinced by it, but I'm like appreciative of like a man who
I think
has a belief,
yeah,
is like sticking to his belief and like trying to be rigorous.
Are you on speakerphone or something? By the way, I can't. You coming in a little weird, but what I was saying earlier is that there's this like layperson's attempt to try to be scientific, and that's the way I like categorize Brian. Because I want to finish your sentence earlier. Again, your mic's a little like weird sounding right now, but when you were saying, I was going to finish the sentence where you were like, well, he's doing it the way you would do it, and I want it to be like the way you would do it is you do a clinical trial, right? If you wanted to be, accurate and you thought you had a really good idea, you would fund a 2,000 or 3,000 person clinical trial and see how it goes. So to answer the other guy's question though, I do think we'll live older and older, and it's already started to happen. And there's no fundamental limit as to why we couldn't live to be 200 or 300 or 400 or 500. Nobody's more excited about that than me. But let me correct that. There are people more excited about it than me, and they're selfish. And this is what I really hate about medicine is that, as I mentioned, there's thousands of diseases that we could be treating, but being healthy and wanting to live longer, that should be last on the list. And I read this very touching eulogy of a guy's very famous guy in the technology scene. Actually, he lost his brother, and he basically said, he's not going to cry about it. He's just going to say, why am I not doing anything about it? And why can't we just live? And yeah, I miss my father, for example, and I wish that he were here right now. But I'm not urged to go make sure that every 69-year-old lives to be 70. As much as I miss my dad and I love him, and I would give anything to see him again. I'm more interested in the kid that's 11 making it to 12. And most kids who are 11 make it to 12. But very few people who are 50 make it to 150. Almost nobody. So I get that, we should think about it, but there's still plenty of wood to chop on the plain old, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cancer, etc. So I think that longevity is just merely fixing the diseases left on the table that pharma hasn't finished off or has, started, but, not fully there yet, like oncology or, some of the other, stuff that's still outstanding. I think guys like Brian, their work is meaningless. Like they're not teaching us anything because they're doing the N of 1 stuff. And no matter how much they think they're controlling or trying to make an experiment make sense, it just doesn't make sense. And it doesn't teach us anything. It doesn't help us. It's just, if anything, it's sort of just throwing us in this lull of scientific comfort or scientific sounding comfort. And it's not a true experiment. So I'm surprised you give them a little bit of credit because to me it's well, thanks for trying to be a scientist, but unless I'm doing 500 patients, what do I care about your little experiment to stick some Botox in your dick or something? It's so stupid.
Yeah, I hear you. I guess I'm just I'm thinking about it from the perspective of it's a prototype. Ultimately, I think that we want to enable that kind of space where we can monitor all these different variables and have some kind of infrastructure that underpins a broader clinical trial. But Brian's actually trying to set some of that up, even if it is only N of 1. So I agree that we can't conclude anything from that, but I at least appreciate his efforts to start somewhere and try to study something. The first, car was a really shitty car, but a Ferrari came out of that, 100 years later. And so I think that if, people are really wanting to study this topic, I'm happier to see people like Brian doing what he's doing than people arguing with me about whether or not some random back alley peptide
My
is making them
BPC.
smarter.
No, my
Yeah.
BPC don't say shit about my BPC.
That's big pharma compound.
Yeah, this is a very you're being paid off by big pharma to
Careful.
to shit on BPC, but
So
it's a very subtle discussion, and we should continue it because I don't think you're 100% wrong. I do think that you're parts of it are, and that. Parts of this is good, parts of it are bad. It's just this weird how do we I'm asking the question, can we even get good data out of this? You're asking the question, how do we get good data out of this? And I think both are still outstanding questions. Anyway, Jeff.
Yeah, I've got just maybe 3 very short points. Firstly, I think you should do these more often when you've got time and you're feeling good. I don't know if you could schedule these so everybody knows when to jump in, but because a lot of us are working and don't have the time to always check X. But secondly, the point you brought, one of the most important points you brought today is bringing the availability of a lot of meds to OTC. Many countries, many people on here that have traveled a lot, I'm sure you're more traveled than probably all of us, but there's lots of countries that don't have any problems with people taking excessive doses or et cetera of a lot of medications. where you could just walk into a pharmacy and OTC the majority of meds that are in simple control. And I think that would actually save a lot of lives. Actually, there's a lot of people that don't have the $50, $100, whatever the price is, to go see a GP, and may not even have insurance, depending on what goes on. I think that would save a lot of lives, much like insulin now.
Yeah, people do it already, right? I mean, Canada and Mexico.
All of South America. All of South America, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have a friend who has Xanax. I have a severe lifelong panic disorder, anxiety disorder. I take venlafaxine for it, which mostly works, but every time I bring up benzodiazepines with my psychiatrist, he correctly, shudders and says, I don't want to give you Xanax. And I'm like, look, I understand. It's a very dangerous drug. It's best used extremely sparingly. But for people, I have somebody in my family that suffers from the same thing, even worse than me. I don't have panic attacks anymore, thank God. But occasionally I'll have like a subclinical little increase in panic. And, this isn't like some social anxiety disorder thing. This is like a chemical avalanche that, makes you feel like you're dying. And it is no rhyme or reason to it. It just happens, and it's completely biochemical. And Xanax is extremely good at making that disappear, but it's also very addicting and dangerous and deadly. So that's an example of a drug that's the polar opposite, where that shouldn't be on the shelves.
Sure, correct.
For anybody practically. But it got so bad with benzos and opioids, where it's like, look, these are medically valuable things, and doctors are so afraid of
restricted
giving them that you basically have to be, hospice care 3 days away from death to get an opioid, and I think that's a bummer. And then on the other side of the spectrum, it's like you said, so that tends me to go to my friend who gets this stuff from Mexico and just get a handful of this stuff just in case I ever might have an emergency and need it. And that's just not good medicine for obvious reasons.
Right.
And, but that liability is no longer sitting with my doctor. It's sitting with nobody now. And, similarly, you take a really low impact drug like you're describing, and, somebody still needs to be blamed. And I think this is a big part of an American problem, where we have such a wide tort system.
Litigious.
Right? Where it's like, well, the big problem here is that somebody gets to sue the doctor, and somebody wants to be accountable, whether it's FDA, the drug company, the doctor, the insurance company. Somebody's getting sued. And I think that attitude is terrible for medicine, because it sort of like requires that there's blame all the time. And
and we're all going to go at some point.
So. Well, that's the thing. My dad died at 69, and I'm 99% sure that he died because of a EMT error, but I've never brought it up with the rest of my family. And I've never brought it up or blamed them. Medicine's hard. They didn't realize they should defibrillate them, and Lord knows what happens in that, handful of minutes where you can save somebody's life. Mistakes happen. But I don't blame the paramedics for messing it up. I feel like if I was there, I could have done something. But the reality is that medicine's hard, and these things will happen. And the fact that we seek immediately to go sue somebody or go, the second a drug has a side effect, or the second, there's something wrong, I think that's why this happens. That's why we don't have, the freedom that you have in some of these other countries.
The last thing I'd like to add is I did send you a DM, and it's something regarding that you've spoken about today. I think it would be of interest. I won't waste your time. You'll see on DMs here in X.
Cool. I'll check it out.
All right. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Hey, Martin. I got a question.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for doing this space. I'm a guy who does my free time. I do some in-depth reading, just like physiology textbooks and stuff, which is enough to know that you should mute like that entire anabology space on Twitter, because like nobody knows what they're talking about.
Yeah.
But my question for you is, I'm just a guy with a finance background. You were talking to that guy earlier. You said he knows nothing. He should get a degree, get into biotech. I thought that was awesome. But if I want to actually do that, what would you recommend this day and age? If I want to get into biotech, I want to get into drug development.
Yeah, I used to have a list of books. My old YouTube account that got deleted by accident. I think the best place to start in medicine is pharmacokinetics. And there's a book by a Rosenbaum that I think is pretty good, but I'm sure any book on pharmacokinetics, which is basically how does the drug travel throughout the body. That subject is pretty important, and teaches most of medicine, quite frankly, in one fell swoop. Everything else is sort of like physiology specific. So
yeah,
the textbooks from like Harvard Medicine on like genetics, for example, they're very good reads to understand, because genetics applies to everything, every disease, and it has its own special diseases. But if you just read cardiology or something, you might learn a lot about the heart, but you don't learn everything. So genetics is the next place I would go, and again, any medical school has some genetics textbook it's using.
Gotcha.
There's a couple popular ones. So those are two really good ones. And then the best books I like about pharma, there are not too many that are good, but there's a couple gems, and they're very, very hard to get. But Hallelujah Moments is probably the best book ever written on, this weird world of how to make a medicine. And Hallelujah Moments by Eugene Cordes. He's this Merck dude who actually I know a bunch of the people he worked with, and it's an amazing journey into how some of these medicines are made, and it's not necessarily written for pharma experts, but it takes you ringside, so to speak, of like how some of these drugs were discovered and made. And there's some really crazy stories about some of these you learn over time. But the journals that are like more intense than this, like Journal of Medicinal Chemistry, which you can get through university license or just purchase. But JMedChem, to me, is like Hallelujah Moments in a peer-reviewed format. And
Gotcha.
it's a lot less interesting necessarily, every little story, because that one's sort of collecting it from a human perspective. But JMedChem, you basically get the full story. How did they think about how to make this medicine? Where did they decide? When did they decide to do something about this disease?
No Croatian studies.
What's that?
No Croatian studies.
Yeah, exactly. It's usually pharma authors, and they are university authors, and it's a very heralded journal. And if BPC was ever published in JMedChem, I would change my mind about my open-mindedness immediately. But or JPET, or some of these other, I used to love reading JPET. But in any event, you want to see the whole molecular story, and then ask, what were the hard things? What was hard about this? What did they overcome? Because there's always these questions of like, well, NaV1.7 inhibitor, for example, NaV1.7, NaV1.8 been around forever. Those molecules are so promising because you think you could get the perfect pain drug out of it, a completely non-toxic, non-addicting pain drug. But pharma has struggled quite a bit to crack the NaV1.7, NaV1.8 code, and that
it's opportunity.
Yeah, it is and it isn't, right? It's like Vertex has gotten the first NaV drug approved, but the dream was this drug would be extremely potent and extremely easy to take with no side effects. And unfortunately, NaV7 just hasn't quite yet gotten it there. And maybe there'll be a NaV7 that does get there. And the other problem is it's not clear that this is what the world needs, even though to a lot of people it sounds great, but it's not actually what would be a really good selling drug, surprisingly. But in any event, those are a couple of resources that, to get into the world of medicine in a serious and professional way. I think the Monday morning quarterback of like trying to develop stuff on yourself is a little crazy. At the same time,
Right.
there are plenty of maverick folks out there. Merck figures very prominently in the history of drug development and drug discovery. I had a number of friends who were very senior at Merck, and one guy was describing, he's super old man, so describing starting out at Merck, many, many decades ago. And he said, Martin, I think I'm like 28, just finished, PhD, joining Merck, R&D department. Sitting there and some famous, I won't say who, some famous scientists, maybe the head of Merck research, something like that, shows up to the lab. And he said, Martin, I kid you not, he starts taking his pinky finger and dipping it in all the investigational drugs that Merck has and starts licking his finger. And I said, yeah, pretty, the reason that story came up is I was describing some other drug we had a hard time making, and we got it to this like slurry formulation where it was like, it was a semi-solid. I mean, we really need to get this to a crystal, some kind of like powder. And, I said, I'm sitting here looking at this thing. I said, it looks like coconut chips. Maybe I should, take it out. And he's like, Martin, it's not a joke. So many people do this all the time. And I said, listen, if we're making this thing correctly, it's very unlikely that this thing's toxic. And who's going to tell me not that I can't do this? This is my property. And of course, it's a stupid idea, but knowing that, you don't actually, you're not going to die if you take this thing. I think it's a far cry from going from that to all the way over to, let me try to do it myself.
Right.
There's sort of some in between in there that's healthy and some that isn't. Like, there are some molecules that just, small molecules especially, really just shouldn't be taken by people. Peptides are safer, but again, most people here, don't necessarily know the difference between peptide and not. Anyway, what's up, Zintani?
Just one
Hey,
more question.
Martina. I just
sorry.
started retatrutide,
Why?
and I am retarded. I don't know. What's wrong with it?
Nothing's wrong with it. Something's wrong with you.
Yeah, I mean, we know that.
You don't need to lose weight. But don't tell that to any woman, right? I mean, women always want to lose weight. But I think it's a weird drug though, because like, let's say you had a big chocolate cake in front of you. I like chocolate cake at least. I want to eat the whole thing. And what would be your feeling for something like that? Pick whatever food you like, I guess. That like I could eat like 100 cookies or 100 pieces of chocolate cake. So does it like make you be like, I don't want to eat more? Or does it make you feel like, I'd love to eat this, but I'm full? Like, how do you feel when you take it?
I just started it last week. I'm on 2 milligrams. I haven't noticed. I mean, I'm eating less. I have less food noise is all I've noticed. But it's early. I'm early.
Yeah, it feels like something that's like very, like dangerous in a way that like I would like taking away that joy. There's actually a drug called Rimonabant that figures pretty big in pharma history as well. So Rimonabant, all right, to understand the story of Rimonabant, you need to understand the story of another drug, which also is pretty famous, called Marinol. So Marinol was the brand name of a drug called dronabinol. And dronabinol is basically THC. So I used to joke with people, they say, well, THC works, but pharma doesn't want to get it approved. It's pharma's the people that got THC approved. So it's Delta-9 THC. And basically it's used for people who really need to gain weight. Why? Well, it's called the munchies. Give THC to somebody and they start eating. And At one point, I was so emorexic as a teenager that my doctor wanted to give me Dronabinol, and I said, okay, I'm too skinny. I got to start bulking up. But Dronabinol is good for people who have cancer or some other situation where they're really, really, really skinny and emaciated, and they truly need to gain weight. So Dronabinol is used to activate, do what cannabis does synthetically. And it never was a big seller for what it's worth. And this is why I always joke, like, well, pharma got THC approved and never sold much. So it's just not that great of a drug. And then, of course, GW Pharma got Epidiolex approved for Lennox-Gastaut and Dravet syndrome. And this is just a cannabidiol, the sort of a part of cannabis, but not THC. And they got that approved for epilepsy. So in any event, Rimonabant comes around. Rimonabant is a cannabinoid antagonist. So it blocks weed from binding its receptor to give you the munchies. So Sanofi makes this drug. Guess what they want to develop it for? Obesity. They basically say, I'll give you anti-munchies. I'll stop you from ever getting munchies. And obviously you say, well, if I never smoke weed, then how does this drug work? Well, it turns out your body makes these little, and I believe they're peptides, that activate the cannabinoid receptors. So there's little peptides that tell you to eat. They give you mini munchies. Cannabinoids are really more potent, like THC. They're 1,000 times more potent than your endogenous natural. You have natural cannabinoids and natural opioids, like endorphins, that make you need sometimes naturally, but they're much less potent than fentanyl or weed. But your body's making them in this chemical factory in your brain. And so in any event, they give Rimonabant to people, and they lose weight. It's decent weight loss, but there's a huge side effect. Does anybody guess what it is?
Death.
It was depression, anxiety, suicidal symptoms. It turns out that when you stop a person from that satisfaction that you can get when you eat, and that whole endorphins, for example, that you get when you run and do things like that, it's pretty dangerous. And they never got FDA approval because the FDA was extremely concerned when a couple of patients here and there would have severe depression. I think somebody killed themselves, and it was just so severe that they said it's not worth it. To lose 5% weight loss, which at the time, I think it was up to 8% weight loss, which at the time was revolutionary. Now GLPs, you get that in a couple of days. So, at the time it was, the best weight loss ever.
They're trying it again.
What did they do? Not for obesity.
Yeah, they are. CB1.
Let's go, run it back, baby.
A company actually made an antibody against that, and it failed to show meaningful weight loss because it didn't cross the blood-brain barrier. It didn't have the.
No surprise there.
Yeah, exactly. Because the theory there is that it's it's a part of the axis, right? The gut-brain axis that needs to be engaged in order for the mechanism to really work. And so, if you actually remove the neuro component, it doesn't actually work. The clinical trial failed pretty spectacularly for Sky. And then there's another company trying it again as well with another small molecule, which I think they claim is it crosses the BBB, but it's selective to one version and not the other or something. And so they think that it'll modulate, in a Goldilocks range.
It can happen. Obviously, this happened with lorcaserin, which I was very adamant the FDA should not approve. They approved it, had modest weight loss, and they ended up taking it forcibly off the market later. They followed my advice 5 years too late, but it was supposed to also be a Goldilocks of fen-phen. Fen-phen was one of the biggest medical dramas in U.S. history. But yeah, the Goldilocks is possible, but you're up against this thing where now the FDA is going to be sitting there looking at every psychiatric report with a fine-tooth comb, trying to figure out what the hell, is going to happen. And you're up against that off the bat. And to me, there's also still, why are you making, like 1/5 of a GLP, right? Like, who needs this at this point, right? I mean, I'm sure there are people that don't love GLPs and they can be somewhat toxic, but at this point, how do you compete with a GLP, with a cannabinoid inhibitor? Seems, even if you can get around the psychiatric problem, you still are at this, like, so many other obesity mechanisms coming as well. Amylin's been around forever, but I just, it seems like a terrible idea. Mad, how about?
Hey, what's up? Hey, what's up, Martin? I just have like a couple quick questions. I guess like one question I just have is about, there's been, as you said, there's been a rise in the prescription of, stuff like Adderall, SSRIs, etc. I actually have a question about the diagnosis process. I recently went through like an ADHD testing, like it was like essentially what I could say like an IQ test followed by a series of attention tests. How effective do you think those are at like formally diagnosing stuff like ADHD? Obviously, I have like a few follow-up questions regarding the medications themselves, but yeah, just specifically, do you think like, these are like the tests that are like the most effective? Do you think that this is
It's a good question.
I feel like mass standardization as well, right? Like,
it's a good question. Do you have a summer job lined up, by the way?
Yeah, I'm probably gonna work at Google, but yeah.
Okay, well, if you want to talk about working over here for the summer, let me know.
I'll be sure to talk to you about
Okay, so I'm always trying to find these younger guys to join up. I got this guy who solved the Urdish problem. This Swiss kid, yeah, it's crazy. And Terry Tao checked the proof and everything. I'm always looking for these young guys because I'm an old goat that is way past his prime. But
I talked to do you know Axiom Math?
Yeah.
I'm sure you would.
Oh,
yeah, I talked to what's this? I think his name's Sibo. Like recently, like the stuff they've been doing with essentially, I think I don't totally understand how they're doing it. Like I just know they're using lean. They're basically just using lean as a tool use.
Yeah.
And they're using for it, but it's a little strange.
I
But,
hate this lean stuff, but we could talk about it. So yeah, I mean, I think the question for a lot of people is, what does ADHD really mean to you? Like, you're obviously a high performing guy that has worked at some of the biggest startups at a young age, and you're probably super duper intelligent, phenom. And I honestly think that the story's different for somebody like you. I mean, it's a totally different world. I think what we want to do is treat everyone special, or make everybody feel special and treat everyone the same. But there's a very big difference between the kid with ADHD that just literally can't sit still and, has severe functional impairment, and then somebody like yourself, that isn't functionally impaired at all, and arguably should not be functionally impaired, and people should listen to, and you're the future corporate leader or future scientific leader. So I'm sort of torn about this, because how much of this is illness and how much of this is our personality and our phenotype that makes us special? I mean, what if Alex Karp wouldn't be Alex Karp without ADHD or whatever it is? And he doesn't want to treat it, he wants to embrace it. And I think there's something like that's pretty important to be okay with. And if you're willing to have somebody call it a disease, Kanye West say it's his superpower, obviously, it's up to you to decide whether or not it's a liability, or it's something you should pay attention to, or God forbid, something you should medicate. In some cases, I think that's really dangerous. Now, if there's, a person that just can't go through the day without being truly functionally impaired, medicine is an option. But I feel like, it's a very dangerous slope to go down, because we have schools that, I didn't fit very neatly into school when I was a teenager, and I'm glad there was some flexibility, because if it was a really rigid system I was in, I'd be the kind of person who was left back or failed or whatever, and couldn't achieve anything. And so I think, the need to conform to a system is really dangerous, and it gets super dangerous when parents and administrators are saying, well, this child is dysfunctional without this drug. And what are these drugs? These drugs are not these subtle little molecules. They're these heavy hammers that, are very dangerous. So I hate the idea, especially, I don't think you need, a test. You've passed the test of life, with your resume. So I think that if you dwell on it and you think that, some behavior modification could make you even more effective, then that's something to talk about with maybe a therapist or, somebody like that, maybe a psychiatrist, but not, reaching for the methamphetamines. I think that's totally crazy. You can change your behavior with meditation or practice or just age. Time might make you less, ADHD, less neurotic. And most people who think they have ADHD, these tests are, to your point, a little more granular. Can you stare at this dot? The average person can stare at this dot for 3.5 seconds, and you stared at it for 2.8 seconds, and now you have ADHD. It's nonsense. If you show me a picture of Zentani's face, I'm staring at that for 63 seconds. But if it's I'm going to stop right there before I get in trouble. But the point is, I don't know that stupid dot test is a really great, tool to determine whether or not, that's, whether or not you have a disease or not. It's such a dumb test. And there's a number of other similar ADHD tests that, what are they really measuring? And often, that's what Anthony and I spend time on sometimes these clinical trials, whether they work or not. The best question and the best way to frame statistical tests and clinical trial tests especially is, what am I measuring? And oftentimes you'll learn that the study is measuring the baseline characteristics of the patients more than it's measuring the effect size of a drug, and that there can be hidden biases that your study is picking up, and it's you're actually testing what you're supposed to test. And in the case of reframing this for ADHD, the test is literally very good at measuring whether or not you can stare at this dot. Yeah. And is that a surrogate for attention deficit or whatever, hyperactivity? Or is it just what it is, which is how long can you measure the dot? It's a very good test for that. What does it mean? Now, it's a surrogate because we can't measure what we really care about, which is, can you not annoy the teacher so much? And if that's the not annoying the teacher-itis, that's the test. That's a different, that's not a disease in my opinion. And I think if anything, some of those kids, I was about to say patients, some of those kids should be more nurtured and more able to explore the questions they have and to be interested. How dull is it to force these kids to sit and listen and so forth? So I'm guessing you finished high school at this point, or?
Yeah. I started college pretty early. I was 17 when I started, but I'm actually a sophomore now, so I'm like a second year.
Oh, okay. Great. Cool. I don't know if Anthony, you want to add anything to that crazy world, but I thought you would find some of that.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear. I appreciate you saying that. I think I might have something along the lines of what we're talking about, but I've never I've never found it personally very instructive to put any labels behind it or try to get medication for any of that kind of stuff. Personally, I think that insofar as you know how to navigate that space on your own, for me personally, I've had times where I found it helpful and instructive to talk to someone about that kind of stuff. Put language to it, help me describe it, help me navigate how I felt about stuff, and that was super helpful and healthy. And now I don't need this stuff anymore because I can take care of my own problems by myself, and that's my situation. So I think it's good for people to be able to navigate those spaces on their own if they can, but otherwise, seeking help and looking for help is a really normal and healthy and good thing to do. So
sorry, I don't want to cut either of y'all off, but I think I guess the primary reason why I asked this question was because I didn't actually formally seek out this test because I thought there was a big issue or whatever, but I kind of just took it just to see, for some reason my psychiatrist was completely convinced I had ADHD, so he was like, you have to take Adderall now. I was on like a 15-day like trial period, and like I absolutely hated it. And it just made me think about like how accessible the drug is to everyone, right? It's
This is crazy. I mean,
it's like insane.
give it to a young man. I mean, I don't know how old you were at the time, but
Yeah.
it's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, I mean, it's it's somewhat encouraged, and honestly, the medical liability for those doctors should be raised. Now, it doesn't look like there's really crazy long-term impacts of these drugs, but it's still,
Actually,
it's still a little.
There's one thing. It's like, I think one thing. I remember you were talking about stimulants with some guy recently, right? I forgot exactly who he was, but so I read a couple of studies on specifically Adderall and I think modafinil. I remember Sam Altman was like going public. He's like, yeah, I take modafinil every day or something like that. I don't know if this was the exact drug, but so, I mean, I did some research on it, and like from my experience personally, right? It just feels like you just feel like you're doing stuff. You feel like you're doing stuff. But I think like something that these tests, like I think clinical studies in particular, I think IQ is like an okay reasoning test, but I do significantly feel like my reasoning goes down. I'm not sure if it's like the increase in norepinephrine or something else, but yeah, I don't know. It's like weird that the clinical studies don't effectively measure reasoning, and I think it's like widely agreed upon that like IQ is not like an amazing metric for how a person can reason about things, but yeah, I don't know. I just feel like when I took the drug, I just felt like I feel like I want to do stuff, but I'm not really thinking about anything. It's like more like an autopilot type of drug. Yeah, I got to get to writing some code, or my colleagues are going to kill me. But anybody else want to? Daniel, I know you've been waiting.
I'll just add like one quick comment to that and just say that like, look, I think that some doctors always like reading really well, but sometimes, especially for young men, I think there's like in some spaces, there can be a disconnect between like reading what a normal little like healthy boy or like a young man like is up to and just like what you think they ought to be doing or what you want them to be doing, and pathologizing normal like young male behavior is like something to watch out for, and in my opinion is like overlooked a lot. I think that like guys get their energy out in different ways than women do, and sometimes guys can be overactive or hyperstimulated, and there's nothing wrong with just sending them outside and going for a run or playing a sport or something like that to calm them down. That's one way to deal with it. Medication is another way to deal with it. I encourage people to consider all options before they resort to medicine, though. It's better to do something naturally if you can. So that's what I would say, just as like a quick comment.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that was going to be my message for Zintani, directly from God, who for some reason has abandoned the classic egg a day diet, highly successful.
Okay, Daniel.
Yeah, appreciate you fitting me at the end here. Yeah, so I really like those recommendations you gave me. It's gonna be fun to read them. But my concern is, you get through the whole thing. Even if I understood it, how would I be hireable, do you think?
Yeah,
Should I just go off to school? What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I think, look, pharma is not exactly the best career anyway.
Yeah.
I think it's like most people, if you just love something, I just love medicine.
Right.
You can't take me away from reading about drugs and medicine. It's just so interesting. But I think that if you want to pursue that career, I mean, yeah, a lot of people do med school. Some people, I mean, Anthony, is a good example. I mean, you can get in to adjacent fields like the life sciences field pretty easily, I think. Get into the world of mass spec or other, adjacent cell culture. There's stuff that's around it that's close, pretty close.
So elaborate.
Well, yeah, I can chime in and just say that, like for me personally, like I did biomedical engineering in school. So like I had some exposure to like science generally, but like really nothing in like pharma or biotech. And then my first gig at a university, I worked for like Martin was saying, a mass spec company, and we did a lot of early stage like support work for like R&D efforts and like through contracts like with pharmaceutical and biotech companies. So like I've worked with all of them, like all the big pharmas and hundreds of small biotechs. I think a lot of academics. I've all kind of like hired my company company, and I got to kind of see what they're up to and how they operate, and went to a bunch of conferences, and it's a very special like way that that happened to me. I wouldn't recommend it as like a path
Right.
per se, but like I mean, one thing you can do and what everyone can do is just like start learning about like an individual company. Like one of my boys, he's really like he's cracked. Like so you can see him on here. He posts a lot on X. His name's Snaking. Yeah, I think his actual handle is like Adulteration or something. But if you look him up, he's a
Snaking?
naked. Yeah, his handle is Snaking. His picture is like a naked cat, like a
Okay.
hairless cat. But he's pretty cracked. Like he you know, he and I, we work a lot together. The kid's a teenager, and he's like he's as right as much as I am about, you know, companies, whether they're going to go up or down, basically.
Mm.
But you know, this kid's 19, and he's, you know, going to school for finance as well, and you know, he's gonna do well. Like he's already getting some really good offers from some really, you know, important people, I think, in the space. And you know what he's done is just basically started from scratch. Like he hangs out in the right communities, he networks. You know, a lot of us are there to support each other. No one knows everything, you know, especially in the first bit. Like I knew a lot about the basic science when I started doing this kind of stuff, like in the finance space. But I learned the finance thanks to guys like, you know, Martin, who share a lot of their experience and work, and it's all there on YouTube, and you can go sit there and, you know, spurg out and watch 20 hours of Martin stuff, and you can learn
Right.
about how to chop up a biotech. But beyond that, I mean, like just start with one company, like pick one, like anyone, like a small, but usually like a single asset company makes things simpler. Like, I don't know, like right now I'm looking at a company called C4. I like them a lot. They're a myeloma focused company. They have a couple of assets, but there's one that I'm following, and you know, just
Well,
kind
for
of
investing?
go down the. Oh yeah, yeah, I like them. They're more of like a later stage story, like later stage being like next year kind of thing. It'll play out, but I like them a lot. And like I said, just like pick a drug, and like learn everything you can about it. Like learn about like how it works, and like, you know, what the indication is like, and how these people are affected, and like learn about patients, and like learn about patient communities, and just do some DD. Like just spend some time like
So
living and breathing in this space.
you're saying get knowledgeable so you can make financial plays?
I'm saying get knowledgeable so you can understand the space. Like you're
Okay,
not going to
gotcha,
be able
gotcha.
to have any alpha like over
Yeah, yeah.
over anyone off of like on day one. But you're asking about how to break into the space, right? And you break into a space by offering value to people that otherwise don't know you. Like,
Right,
you
right.
know, if you're trying to break into a space that, you know, you never operated in before, well, the first thing you should do is understand what that space is like and engage in the community. You should try to contribute to that community. Maybe it's literally just like going to a networking event and like fucking running coffee. Like, I don't know, man. Like you need to make yourself, you know, valuable to people, and then they'll be willing to return some value in kind. And so that's like my you know, advice to anyone in this room who wants to, you know, operate in this space. Like go make yourself valuable, go operate in the space. You know, you're not going to do it super effectively by yourself on a computer. Even if you sit here on X all day and you run into like rooms like this, like you might pick up a thing or two. But I think that, you know, it'll be really quite a bit more instructive to like uh, you know, learn a lot, but like also engage in a community. Like find a good one. I don't know what you know, which one, you know, you're specifically trying
Like
to break
local
into or anything
events?
like that. What's that?
Like local events?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if you live in a big city and there are local biotech events, go to them. That's like,
Okay.
and that's like I'm Canadian, and like it's been a absolute struggle trying to find events, you know, in
Right, right.
Canada, because like Canadian biotech scene is just like anemic. But I'm living in the States now, and I'm super jacked about it, because like even in my local town now, I'm like, wow, there are actual events like consistently. Like I'm not even in like one of the huge biotech like hubs, like, you know, Boston or SF. Like if you're there and you don't have events to go to, like you're just being lazy. Like there are so many. Like I'm jealous. But whenever I travel, I always go to events. Like I would travel pretty regularly for work, and I'd always make sure to go to events. Like I'd be like, oh, I'm here for an extra Tuesday. I'm sticking around. Like I'm gonna go to the local biotech event. Like, oh, it's you know, there's
Check out
something
what's going
going on.
on.
Like I would always try to go. Yeah, and if you're in like a big city, like there ought to be at least a couple like
Yeah,
here and
yeah.
there. You know, so I'd really recommend it. Like, you know,
That's
just start, like I
interesting.
said, hanging out and making friends, and you know, you'll stumble upon people, and you might have a skill set today that you could, you know, bring value to someone else who, like, you know, nerds and scientists don't usually have a finance background, and vice versa.
Yeah,
So you know,
yeah.
there's a natural like complementarity there. It's good to be friends.
Yeah, you're cutting out a little bit. Maybe that's just me. But that's something I wouldn't have thought of. So you're saying get competent and then just involve yourself and see what's going on and like offer things. I see what you're saying. Yeah,
All
well,
right, I'm
appreciate
going to wrap
appreciate
it
that.
up. Thank you guys so much for coming. See you next time. Adios.